The story begins with two children sitting in front of a castle. The little boy places a flower crown on the girl's head, commenting to Eiglet that her white hair is very beautiful. The girl becomes embarrassed. However, she is interrupted by the shout of a woman calling her brother by name, as if scolding him. A woman calling for Heron asks what he thinks he is doing and pulls him away forcefully. Questioning why he had let that thing out of the tower where it should have stayed, the girl returns to her chambers alone, locked away in darkness for her entire life. A few years later, Eiglet is accused of attempting to assassinate the Empress. What the poor girl, frightened, says is that it wasn't her who did that, enraging her father and stepmother who remained impassive. She pleaded for them to believe her, appealing to her brother and the memories she had of him when they were still children. But now the boy looked at her with disdain, which left Eiglet even more desperate. One of the subordinates explains that even if she were a princess, she could not go unpunished for attempting to assassinate the Empress. However, there was another way to pay for her crime, and that was by sacrificing herself, which made the girl tense. The boy explains that to summon the saint to this world, they would need Eiglet's precious blood, and if she did this, all her sins would disappear, and she could reach paradise. Her brother approaches her, reigniting a hope in the girl. However, he points the sword at her face without a second thought, stating that just seeing that white hair made him want to vomit, scolding the protagonist for having planned to kill their mother with a curse and how she was lucky to be chosen by divine revelation for this. She would forever be known as the Princess of Tragic Sacrifice. Her words left Eiglet somewhat lost. How could she save the world anyway? It wasn't as if she had a choice. Even accepting her fate, she still wondered who would save her. In another world, far from that setting, in a subway station, citizens were stunned by a woman who had fallen onto the tracks and on a cell phone. The notification for choosing the name of the world's savior shone. The girl woke up in a place she did not recognize. She had just fallen onto the tracks, so it made no sense to be there. But when she saw herself in the mirror, she realized that the design of her dress was somewhat old-fashioned, in addition to now having white hair and a different face, which made her think that this was the appearance of Princess Eiglet Archaeoteryx. The bird that brought dawn to the world was a romance and combat game made for women. There you could choose to get close to handsome guys, and your goal was to defeat the demon king who was trying to destroy the world in this game. Eiglet was a woman who sacrificed herself to summon the protagonist. Who was the saint, however? Because of a divine revelation, it was revealed that a sacrifice was necessary to summon the saint, thus protecting her people from danger. Eiglet offered herself for the sacrifice, however. This divine revelation was manipulated by the Demon King, so the princess should not have to die ironically. Because of the ritual, the Demon King ended up being killed by the summoned heroine from another world. But if that was the case, why did the girl have so many vivid memories of the game? She believed that this was just a dream. After all, she had been playing this type of game when a maid arrived in her room calling her Lady Eiglet, asking to clean her face, which made everything seem more real a few days later. She realized that it really wasn't a dream. Somehow she had become the princess, and even her memories were starting to surface in the girl's mind. Eiglet had been raised locked in a tower as a princess. Without any magical power, she didn't know what would happen in the future. But if everything was like in the game, she would die. Soon the problem was that she remembered having died once, which made her question whether she could be going back in time anyway. She knew that the character would be sacrificed sooner or later. That's why she was sure she needed to escape that place. The problem was that to do so, she would have to pass by the maids who were extremely quiet and the guards who stood outside the room. Moreover, her room was at the top of the tower, so jumping was not an option. And she had no magic she could use. She was completely lost about what to do. After all, she couldn't just leave there as she pleased. She knew that the game's narrative made it seem like Eiglet lived in the tower to protect herself. But in reality, that tower only isolated her from everything and everyone. Moreover, even if she managed to escape, she would be brought back because of her white hair, which was very different. In that world full of magic, all humans were born with extraordinary powers, and the darker their hair, the more power they possessed. If the flashbacks she had were true and she could go back in time, maybe she could discover who incriminated the princess, which made her wonder who the culprit could be. Perhaps it was the emperor or one of the nobles, or maybe it was the empress. Even though the girl didn't want to suspect her brother, who was the prince of that kingdom, Eiglet's half-brother was the main prince of the game, known for being loyal and a strong knight. So even if he had done something terrible, he was still one of the most handsome characters anyway. The girl wonders if the story of the Demon King manipulating the revelation was true. But even if it were, she wouldn't sacrifice herself for those people, as the Demon King hated humans and hid from the world. The protagonist questioned whether it was he who truly wanted to end everything. She remembers that in the game there was even a glitch to summon him in the early levels, which would cause a great uproar among humans. This gives the protagonist a great idea. She could summon the king using this glitch and let him kidnap her. The only problem is that it would all be in vain if she were killed. That's why she needed to show him that she was someone useful. Perhaps by using the existence of the saint to her advantage, or she could even serve by doing household chores. Anyway, it was definitely better than staying there in that tower and waiting to be killed. But to do this, she needed some summoning items: a freshwater pearl, a piece of charred coral, a broken silver knife, a branch of wisdom, an intact mirror, and finally, a bitten apple. Honestly, they didn't seem like easy items to find. In my opinion, Eiglet was busy in her room making the rune for the ritual when someone entered. It was her stepmother, who wanted to know what Eiglet was up to in there, trying to hide things in her bed. The protagonist greets her stepmother from afar. Empress Mena questions whether the girl knew anything about some national treasure items that had recently gone missing, probably due to some rat that was loose. Noticing that the girl was trying to hide something, she comments that she probably found the rat's hiding place. Eiglet realizes that she has drawn the attention of a very problematic person. During the game, that woman was introduced as a concubine who became an empress after Eiglet's mother died and was generally portrayed as someone kind. But in reality, she was a shrew who picked on Eiglet all the time and sarcastically said that the princess of the kingdom of Terex was very greedy for taking all those items. And that's why her stepmother was even embarrassed to show her face to others. This makes the protagonist apologize. Anyway, Mena orders the princess to return the stolen items. But she couldn't concentrate on that because she realized that the moon was already in the perfect position for her summoning. This is because the time frame in which she could use the game's glitch to her advantage was quite limited, restricted to a short moment on a full moon night. In other words, if she didn't escape that night, she would have to wait at least another month to try to flee. But if the items were confiscated, she also wouldn't be able to get out of there. That's why Eiglet warns her stepmother to be careful not to hurt herself, in a threatening tone which leaves the woman quite confused until the girl opens the curtains of her bed, revealing the summoning ritual prepared there with all the items she had indeed taken. Mena questions what the girl was doing with those things and says she would love to help with her whims under different circumstances. But before she could finish her sentence, Eiglet takes a bite of the apple she had managed to steal, causing it to roll on the floor right after. And then, she began to pray. Summoning her savior spirit once and for all, a great light shines from the center of the ritual on her bed, indicating that it had worked, and the power is so intense that it ends up throwing Mena away. The woman screams, questioning what kind of magic the girl was using. She was terrified because she felt a dark aura there, along with an extreme amount of magical power emanating in the room, until she saw a boy with a pair of horns cross through the wall of the room, which made her even more disturbed. In front of her stood a very serious boy. He had dark hair like coal and large horns. The woman recognized that figure from afar, which made the lady faint from so much nervousness. Seeing this scene, the Demon King wonders if it was she who summoned him. But to his surprise, there was someone else there. And Eiglet steps in front of the boy, claiming that she was responsible for that, pleading with him to hire her. The protagonist desperately needed to be hired to escape, so she insisted again that he hire her. But the Demon King did not quite understand the reason for the proposal. As Eiglet had managed to capture his attention for a while, she hurried to introduce herself as Eiglet Archaeope Terex, the princess of the kingdom of Terex, and explains that her time of death was approaching, which had already been predestined. Knowing that she was a princess makes the Demon King even more curious. She continues her speech, explaining that if she died, the guy in front of her would die soon after, and he responds that the princess spoke as if she knew something about him. Then, Eiglet says that she knew he was the Demon King Raven, and the fact that she knew his name leaves the Lord astonished, questioning how a human knew his identity and reality. The protagonist had learned his name from an announcement on social media, since in the game he was only referred to as the Demon King, and the only ones who knew his true identity were his vassals in the game. He was the most powerful being and was known for his very dark hair and his exceptional students. Anyway, Eiglet resumes her speech, reminding him that she would be killed soon and then sacrificed to summon a saint from another world, who would take Raven's life. According to the story she knew, this saint would ally with the hero to defeat the Demon King, which was definitely news to the boy. That was the whole drama of the game. And even though it was simple and cliché, she knew they hadn't made a dating simulator for girls that only focused on romance. There had to be more stories involved. Raven couldn't believe her, and that's why he wanted her to find a way to prove what she was saying. But the protagonist had no way to do what he wanted. So she said that if he didn't believe her, he could just leave. As time would prove she was right still, the boy questions why the human princess was giving all this information to a demon like him. And the reason was simple. Eiglet didn't want to die, at least not again. Confessing this to the boy, every word that came out of her mouth left the Demon King more shocked and intrigued, to which Eiglet responds that she needed to get out of that place. Confessing that even if she escaped, she wouldn't be able to make any friends with humans because of her white hair. It was then that Raven realized he hadn't even noticed that the girl had snow-white hair, something Raven had never seen before. Noticing his confusion, Eiglet asks if he didn't know her story, about how she was the powerless princess of royalty indeed. The Demon King had never come across that information before, but he was intrigued by it all. The protagonist already suspected that the Demon King didn't know Eiglet's story. And she was right. This meant that the rumor that he had manipulated the divine revelation of the princess's sacrifice was wrong. She needed to manage to capture the boy's attention to discuss this further. At least she could trust Raven. Unlike the humans surrounding her, the Lord is curious to know how she had summoned him if she had no powers. And the girl explains that she used a technique that didn't require magic, omitting the fact that she had taken advantage of a game bug. But the boy insists on his questions as he wanted to know how she discovered this technique. The girl tries to explain herself, still not knowing what excuse to make. But she is interrupted by her brother, Heron, who bursts into the room, asking what that commotion was. Earlier noticing the presence of the Demon King, he asks what was happening there. Raven is intrigued to notice the presence of someone he had heard of, who was the Grey Prince Heron. The boy runs to help his mother, asking if she was hurt anywhere since she was still lying on the floor. As Mena awakens, she screams for Eiglet to know where she was and accuses the girl of having summoned the Demon King to kill her, which makes the protagonist realize that things wouldn't be as peaceful as she had imagined. The mama's boy obviously believes everything and also reprimands Eiglet. He points his sword at his own sister, saying that she not only tried to kill the Empress but was now working with the Demon King, and questions if that was how a member of royalty should behave. The protagonist even tries to explain that she wasn't planning to kill her stepmother, but the boy interrupts her with shouts, telling her to stop lying, because it was his maid who said she was repeating curses several times in the room. While Heron yelled that the girl was ungrateful for doing this to Mena, who had blindly trusted Eiglet, Raven found the whole situation ridiculous, until her hand became enveloped in a blue mist which surprised and alerted the Lord. It was as if his magic was being sucked away by Eiglet, who was quietly beside him. Meanwhile, the brothers continued exchanging insults, and Heron was ready to talk about Eiglet's presence. But the princess already knew that speech and completed his statement. "My presence is dark, right?" Surprising her brother. In any case, he calls the guards and says she will be arrested for attempted murder of the Empress, and that after that, he himself would destroy that place and the Demon King. Again, the girl tries to convince Raven to take her with him. The Demon King thinks it was at least interesting to see a princess born in the sacred kingdom of light without any power, and this makes him smile. Then, Raven extends his hand to the princess, saying he could take her with him without any problems. The two seal the agreement when Eiglet holds the Lord's hand while Heron continues shouting, reprimanding her for her actions. Even so, the princess is carried by the Demon King without any resentment, and she asks her brother to take care of himself before leaving him. As the two fly out of the tower, the boy even tries to call his sister again, but it is already too late. Flying over a large castle, Raven warns that they have arrived. This was impressive for Eiglet, because in the game she had to make a lot of effort to reach the place, but now they had entered there in a leap. The boy lands softly, being welcomed by another demon. It was his butler, Owl, asking where he had been all this time, until the girl steps out from under the Demon King's cloak. The butler is shocked that his master brought a human to the castle, and Raven explains that she is the princess of the kingdom of Terex, and she summoned him to kill the Empress, making the girl protest that it was not her intention to kill Mena. She makes it clear that if that is what he thought had happened, he was wrong. Therefore, the Demon King corrects himself to Owl, explaining that he was mistaken. The butler asks how exactly she did that, but even Raven didn't know. He just brought her there because she asked him to hire her, which makes Owl even more interested. Raven comments that it was indeed quite curious, but he had hired her as his personal body pillow, which was a rather strange job, and discovering that this would be her function leaves both the princess and the Demon King's subordinate shocked. The butler serves a little tea to Eiglet and asks her to enjoy it. The princess thanks him, reflecting on the taste, which was the same as the teas she was already used to drinking for her. It was a surprise because she thought all food made by demons would be strange in some way. While she was sitting there, she couldn't help but observe the details of that hall, especially the Demon King. After all, from that day on, she would be the Lord's body pillow. Eiglet wondered if this body pillow thing was just a joke because it was very strange. Honestly, if it were an 18-plus story, she would understand. But since it isn't, she is also intrigued to know what kind of service this is. Owl breaks the silence in the room to ask his lord who that human was, but he says he has already explained everything. Then, Owl asks if she really is the princess of the kingdom of Terex. To him, it was strange because he had never heard of any princess in the royal family. However, Raven reaffirms that Eiglet is indeed a princess, and even the Grey Prince, Heron, confirmed that she was his younger sister. Although he didn't understand the reason for keeping the girl's existence a secret, the Demon King decided not to comment but was almost certain they did this because of the girl's white hair in front of him. He had never seen anyone without any magical power before, and now he was in the presence of a princess without magic, hidden in a very tall tower. Perhaps to protect her from the world, or maybe there were other reasons Raven stared at the girl intently. The girl had a distinct aura that shone at all times. The Demon King asks her again if she tried to kill the Empress. Angrily, Eiglet repeats that she had already said that, and that she hadn't tried to do anything. She was just incriminated for something she was completely innocent of. Resuming the conversation from earlier, the Demon King repeats what the girl said about the saint who would appear to defeat him if Eiglet sacrificed herself. But what troubled him was that, even though she was human, she seemed to care more about her life than about defeating the Demon King. The girl responds that she indeed cared, because dying was in the middle of the sentence. Flashbacks of her former life, when she was pushed onto the train, come to her mind. Just like when she faced the sword, already in Eiglet's skin. Then the girl concludes, shuddering, that dying is scary. She was completely unsettled by the situation. And Raven is understanding, saying he got her point. With that resolved, he asks the butler to get a maid to take care of the girl, but Owl asks him to wait, and questions whether he would really keep the princess there. After all, it could just be a trap from the humans. But the Demon King was not worried, and he questions what kind of trap it would be. He quickly adds that even if it were a trap, it was not a problem, as he had plenty of time and many lives to deal with it. This last part left Eiglet curious, but she decided to remain silent. The young man changes the subject, saying that, as he mentioned before, he was hiring the girl's services as a body pillow. She asks what exactly that meant, to which the Demon King replies that a body pillow was a body pillow, as the name suggested. But Eiglet was thinking about doing more household chores, like taking the dishes or cleaning the floor. Hearing this, Raven says that if she didn't like the role she had been given, he could take her back to her home. It was no problem for the Lord. However, when he explains that her payment would be 500 gold coins per month, along with 3 daily meals and her breaks, he manages to capture the girl's attention again. Moreover, he would also make sure to have the butler bring some of his best sweets for her, which leaves the demon indignant. The girl could not refuse 500 gold coins. She could buy anything with that money, even rare items. So I don't need to say that Eiglet accepted without hesitation, and her response makes the Demon King smile, completing the agreement between the two. Sometime later, as night fell, the girl was heading towards her new master's room. Upon reaching the door, she wonders what exactly a body pillow does, since Raven didn't explain. The girl knocks on the door, and the young man asks her to enter. The princess enters shyly, feeling awkward in the presence of the Lord. Sitting on the bed, reading a book, Raven asks Eiglet to come closer. She walks very awkwardly but obeys the orders, until the Demon King pulls her arm, throwing her onto the bed as if she were light as a feather. Before doing anything, he stares at her intensely, as if he could see through the girl. Eiglet's face was hot and flushed. After all, she didn't know what was going to happen. When he gets closer, her heart races, and the princess becomes increasingly awkward, watching the young man gaze down at her, until he pulls her waist. The girl was starting to understand what was going to happen, and wondered if being a human pillow was a kind of code for the perversions he intended to commit. Raven remained silent, just observing the girl with his dark eyes. In a quick movement, he places Eiglet on top, which only makes the girl's face turn even redder than a tomato. She was even sweating from the heat she felt inside while looking at the young man, until he leans closer to her face, catching her by surprise. and turns the princess on the mattress so that she becomes the little spoon. While embracing her, the Demon King thought that perhaps it would be better to hold her with less strength. It didn't take long for them to be enveloped in a blue aura, just like what happened with his hand in Eiglet's room. This makes the young man open his eyes. While the princess couldn't even rest because she was in shock upon realizing that her new master was really just using her body as a pillow. He was very close to the girl's head, and he held her gently. He seemed to be in a deep sleep while the princess absorbed that aura, feeling it flow through her body. She even tries to close her eyes to see if she can rest, but she is too nervous. While Raven felt his body relax more and more, warming up inside and taking away all the pain he felt, it was then that he woke up suddenly. He notices the girl is distant, thinking he had left the embrace too loose. Then he shakes her, asking if she was feeling sick and what was wrong. Seeing her so vulnerable makes the boy embarrassed. Even so, the Demon King realizes that it had been a great choice to use that mysterious girl as his body pillow. Over the girl, Raven stared at her with his chest open, repeating for her to keep her body relaxed. That didn't make much sense in the girl's head, who was already quite confused by her boss's movements. Until the boy extended his hand going towards Eiglet's chest, who soon asks what he was doing. He had noticed that the girl was absorbing all his magic at an increasingly rapid pace. So, he explains that it must be painful to continue that way, and therefore he wanted to help her feel better. The protagonist was so embarrassed that she couldn't even look at his face properly, and even the Demon King had to admit that he was also a bit awkward in that position, but he didn't take his eyes off the girl, who finally looked at him. Perplexed? During the early morning, the two returned to the previous position with Eiglet as the inner spoon. The Demon King only thought that this princess was incredible. After all, just by touching her, he felt his magic being drained, as if she were a bottomless well of healing for him. Suddenly, the girl asks if they had stopped the activities, but the Demon King whispers her name in her ear, which makes her even more awkward. Raven gets up and asks if she didn't like the feeling. After all, he wasn't very good at understanding human feelings. Noticing Eiglet's silence, he calls the princess again, but this time she was in a deep sleep, making the boy feel comfortable enough to lie down until the sun rose. When Eiglet woke up, she was quite disoriented. She didn't know exactly at what point in the night she had fallen asleep, and that memory made our protagonist jump out of bed. She was very lost in her memories and began to think that what she should do as a body pillow was very different from what she thought it would be. She wonders if she had done anything more with Raven, and she was already freaking out just thinking about that possibility. It was then that the boy moved in bed, catching her attention. She turns to face him. The Demon King was lying down as if it were a photo shoot for a women's magazine. Eiglet couldn't deny that her new boss was very handsome. This type of automa game was scary for making her find a character like that so charming. While she got lost in her own thoughts, the king continued in his deep sleep. The girl sighed, still blushing with embarrassment over what might have happened last night, and she approached the king to stroke his hair. But before she could reach him, Raven woke up, sitting up suddenly and making Eiglet suppress her urge to touch him. He asks if she had woken up for good. However, nothing had happened. In reality, he had plenty of company to stay awake during the night, if you know what I mean. And he just wanted Eiglet by his side to literally serve as a pillow. Besides, it was she who wanted that job to begin with. His response left the girl confused, a feeling she was already used to at this point in that castle. She became embarrassed again, realizing she was the only one having impure thoughts, arguing that it was he who touched her last night. But the boy explains that he was just trying to help, worried about her. After all, if he really grabbed her, then she could complain. Raven explains further, saying that since Eiglet reacted to the magic being drained from him directly, he was concerned that the sensation would overwhelm her, and that's why he tried to help. He even says he believes he deserves a thank you for that. Since she didn't quite understand what he was talking about, the boy gets dressed while explaining that although she had no magic, she absorbed his and kind of overheated. That's why he decided to help. After all, he didn't want to be attacked by the girl while he slept. And just the fact that he mentioned this offended her losing patience. Raven comments that if she was going to make a fuss over something so simple, it was better to do it quietly. Because he didn't mind helping, but he hated having Eiglet chattering in his ear. And then, the boy leaves the room, slamming the door in the girl's face. Eiglet was fuming with anger, wondering what was wrong with that guy. Moreover, she didn't understand what he meant by absorbing his magic. After all, she couldn't feel anything. So maybe he was just confused. She was sure that if she could use magic, she wouldn't have needed to ask for his help to begin with. Still, Eiglet was aware that she couldn't be expelled from there. Outside the room, the Demon King was as red as a pepper. Awkward, given the whole situation, with her new body pillow. It had been a few good days since Eiglet arrived at the Demon King's castle. The princess's routine was almost always the same. She had breakfast, lounged around, had lunch, lounged some more, had dinner, took a bath, went to sleep, and then repeated all of this the next day. Although it wasn't a tiring routine, it was very monotonous. If she stopped to think, she worked during the night, but even so, it wasn't the same as a regular job. Raven explained that it was because she was absorbing his magic or something like that, but even so, the protagonist didn't understand. Besides that, Raven had developed the habit of calling the girl's name every night. The girl was already as red as a tomato when she decided to push those thoughts away, until she was surprised by a knock on the door. She didn't know it was already time for her daily visit, but she asked the person to come in. Then Owl asked for permission, pushing a tea cart into the room, and announcing that he had brought the girl's snack. That day, the drink of choice was the best demon tea in the world, black rose tea, and he took the opportunity to bring a walnut cookie from that world. Eiglet was very grateful and made a point of showing it every time the butler brought her something, while Owl made it clear that he only did this because it was his superior's orders. And then he asked to leave the room, stating that a maid would come to the girl's room after she finished to clean everything. It was clear to the protagonist that the man hated her. Owl was a demon with high skills and was also Raven's right-hand man. In the game, he was a character that had to be defeated before the player could reach the Demon Lord. There was even a time he appeared in the middle of the story when Eiglet was playing, and she wiped him out. While eating, she reflected that it was kind of strange to think that she had fought against Owl more times than against the Demon Lord himself. Even so, she couldn't deny the butler's culinary skills. After all, that cookie was amazing. She even wondered if he had made it himself. It was a surprisingly impressive talent, especially since there were no details about the daily lives of demons in the game. In fact, now that she stopped to think about it, there were other demons in that castle, and so she made a decision. It was a huge building, as if it were a small city surrounded by walls. The human entered one of the rooms, peeking discreetly through the crack in the door, and found a true banquet happening, with several demons laughing freely and sharing meals. That was a different sight for Eiglet. Just at that moment, the girl was surprised by a young man who asked what she was doing there. Eiglet felt completely awkward as the demon commented that he had never seen her bastard face before, and wanted to know where she had come from and why she was in that place. Unintentionally, the girl tripped over her own feet and couldn't regain her balance in time, falling to the ground and drawing the attention of all the creatures present, which made her wonder if she had gotten into trouble. However, to her luck, one of the women there welcomed her, asking if she was a newbie. What Eiglet confirmed, already sitting at the table and integrating with the group. The girl commented that she seemed quite young and asked if the MC had at least completed her 100 years. Our girl tried not to show it, but she had no idea what the woman meant by 100 years. When she insisted on the question, Eiglet realized that the life expectancy of those creatures was much greater than that of humans, which meant they aged at a different pace. Noticing the strangeness, the girl suggested that the MC go home, saying that her parents must be worried and someone her age had no business being in the Demon Lord's castle. That interaction made Eiglet feel even more awkward. And it didn't take long for other demons to reinforce the woman's words, saying that working in the castle opened doors for the girl to be summoned to work on the front lines. And one of them even offered a carriage to take her home. All this welcoming made Eiglet realize that even though they were demons, the people there were very caring. In fact, to be honest, the humans she was used to dealing with were much more careless. This left the creatures in complete silence, just staring at the girl and processing the information, at least until they burst into laughter, doubting that the girl had really had close contact with Raven. The girl even said that if she were to make up a lie, she would have to work hard to make it convincing. Eiglet explains that she wasn't lying, even though it seemed like she was. It's just that the creatures aren't convinced, continuing with their loud laughter. And one of them says that the Demon Lord wouldn't appear in front of common demons like them because he was too important to do something like that, asking if she really thought that someone so important would bother to talk to a child like Eiglet, and repeating that she should have come up with a more convincing story. Slightly diverting from the lie invented by Eiglet, one of the demons asks what kind of job she said she received from the Lord and if she was in the middle of her shift. Eiglet thinks for a moment before answering, especially because she couldn't just go around saying she was the king's body pillow. But this delay gives the demon more reason to doubt the truth in her words. It was then that the woman said something unexpected to our girl. Look, little girl, the Demon King doesn't sleep. And this leaves her extremely confused. Her friend adds, explaining that Raven's body was so full of magic that he didn't even need to sleep. The image of Raven shining while resting comes to the princess's mind. She couldn't believe it. She had been with him every night and was sure that the boy was in a deep sleep. However, her thoughts were interrupted by the mustached demon, who resumed the question of where the girl lived with her parents, in order to take her home. Eiglet stumbles over her answer because she wasn't lying, but she definitely wasn't in a good position to say that again. However, she is caught off guard when Raven enters the room and questions what she was doing there. The presence of the Lord is enough to make all the other demons kneel, greeting your majesty. But he doesn't care about that, and aggressively pulls Eiglet's arm despite her asking him to wait. The creatures watch the scene in silence, tense about what could happen to the girl. When he finally speaks, the Demon King orders his subjects to stand up because they didn't need to kneel just because he arrived. And then he requests that they listen to him carefully, explaining that the human in his arms belonged only to him, and no one else should even think otherwise. In fact, they could spread the message to those who weren't present there. With his departure, the conversations intensify. The demons comment that they had no idea Eiglet was a human, and they hadn't even felt magic flowing from the girl's body. In another room, Raven throws Eiglet onto the sofa aggressively, making the girl scream. She grumbles, saying that it was still daytime outside and asking what kind of creature had bitten the Demon King. In my opinion, that creature was pure jealousy. But the guy looks at her seriously, with a truly dark expression. And then he explains to the princess that they would take a nap moving closer to her body, lying on top of her on the sofa. This proposal leaves Eiglet completely stunned, and the girl screams, asking what he was thinking by suggesting something like that in the middle of the day. But the boy is quick to respond that it was called a nap precisely because it was at this time. As he tries to get closer to the girl, he receives a shove from Eiglet, who screams again. But the Demon King reminds her that she had signed a contract with him and, in exchange for her stay in that castle, she would have to serve as a body pillow. Trying to compose herself, the girl says that she did accept, but that it wasn't exactly how it worked in practice. And her response leaves Raven uncomfortable. He didn't know if the princess was embarrassed or what, but he decided to help her, suggesting that she offer her lap for him to lie on, and he would be content with that. However, the Lord doesn't even wait for her response and already pulls the girl's arm for her to adjust. And then he rests his head on Eiglet's legs, which surprises her with her master's movement. She can't take her eyes off him, resting so calmly in her lap. And the boy doesn't help either, staring at our protagonist with his deep eyes. That position was even more embarrassing than the spooning they did at night, until Raven raises one of his hands, gently holding a strand of Eiglet's hair and commenting that up close, its color was quite peculiar. Eiglet stared at him while he said those things and seemed ready to hear more unpleasant comments about her hair, as was customary throughout her life. But instead, the Demon King only comments that it was white hair, which when seen up close was too white to be called white. It could perhaps be silver, but it wasn't exactly silver either. Moreover, each strand had a specific color, but when analyzing the whole, it just seemed to be white hair after all. And now, analyzing her strands, she realized that the sensation she had touching him was very different from what she felt during the night. Raven thinks carefully about her next words, before saying that the girl had beautiful hair. This, indeed, catches Eiglet's attention, who gazes at her with wide eyes. She says that she had always heard people say that her hair was quite ugly throughout her life, which Raven thought was a shame because he found the princess's hair really beautiful. And then he questions what she thought about that. But he was caught off guard by the reaction of his new subordinate. At this point, she was crying nonstop while listening to Raven's words attentively. He asks what the reason for her crying was, but the girl replies that she didn't know. And she really didn't know. She didn't understand why a demon could be kinder than a human being. After all, in her mind, these creatures should be completely cold and hateful towards humans. So Raven's words made no sense. That's why she decided to ask him if demons didn't hate humans. And the Demon King explains that, generalizing, the creatures didn't like people. But that was precisely why the girl shouldn't be wandering around the castle out of her master's sight. The comment makes the princess laugh, and she sarcastically asks if that meant she couldn't show herself to any demon and make them uncomfortable. But Raven was serious in his statements and asked if she was at least listening to the kind of absurdity she was saying. And he was warning her to be careful because he was afraid she would get hurt. And she suggests that the young man spoke as if he really cared about her. And then she brings one of her strands to her nose, smelling that beautiful hair, letting out a sigh as if this small act could bring immense peace to her heart. Then, Returning to the subject of concern he had for Eiglet, Raven states that she was his body pillow, after all, and he needed to take care of her. His words make the protagonist's eyes turn yellow again. Suddenly, the Demon King gets up from the girl's lap, and extending his hand to her, he says that if the problem was just boredom, she could go with him to his office. The little girl questions if they were going there to take a nap, but Raven doesn't even respond to that. He just remembers that she said she was bored and could ask Owl to prepare something to help her pass the time. But the girl quickly shouts that she was just joking. After all, the butler already hated her enough, and she didn't want to worsen her situation there. Her exaggerated reaction makes her master smile. And then he calls her again to head to the Demon King's office. As they walked, the girl comments that the demon she spoke to earlier said that Raven didn't sleep, and he explains that it wasn't exactly the case. In reality, it wasn't that he didn't sleep in general. He just couldn't sleep because of the infinite magic flowing inside him. But he asked Eiglet not to worry because this only happened until she arrived there, at the castle, and improved everything. Embarrassed, the girl didn't exactly know what those words meant, to be honest. But she offered to be the young man's body pillow during the day, and the Demon King confirms that he would love for her to do that. Sometime later, already in the young man's office, it didn't take long for Raven to fall asleep. While he slept, Eiglet reflected on why the Demon King needed a body pillow. Moreover, she still didn't quite understand what he meant by saying he couldn't sleep. She thought that maybe the amount of magic the young man carried made him a person with insomnia. But since the game never revealed this kind of thing about Raven, then maybe he had some secret or something like that. While he slept, his hair got tangled with the princess, and she affectionately ran her fingers through the young man's hair, noticing that those strands were so dark they were almost coal-colored. To her, it was strange because she had seen black hair several times, but her master's was strangely beautiful, which made her think it could be because of the magic. She could feel the tips of her fingers tingling, just like it was during the night, but to a lesser extent, which made the sensation a bit more pleasant. However, if she had no problem touching him that way, why was it so different at night when he hugged her? Maybe it was because of the time, or perhaps because they were lying in bed. In any case, she knew she wouldn't have those answers anytime soon. But she knew that if it were always that way, she wouldn't mind serving her master all the time. Meanwhile, in the city of humans, several men were lying defeated on the ground, while a girl boasted about having defeated them, asking if they were really trying to defeat Miss Puffin, and mocking humans for being naive. The girl commented that she was already excited to return to the side of someone she admired greatly. She was referring to the Demon King and hoped that if she killed all the humans, perhaps he would give her some recognition. Inside the castle, Raven was sleeping soundly next to Eiglet. He felt the magic flowing from his body to the girl, and the two were resting covered by the boy's magical aura. When the day dawned, several rays of sunlight flooded the room, startling Eiglet at the fact that it was already morning. She quickly adjusted herself, stretching and thinking about how well she had slept the night before. But now it was time to get up. With so much movement, it didn't take long for the Demon King to open his eyes. Watching the girl slowly get up, Eiglet wondered what would be for breakfast when he reached for her hand. Pulling the girl who let out a startled scream, she quickly fell back onto the bed, scolding the guy because it was already morning. But he argued that he was still sleepy, so they should go back to bed. Even with the girl annoyed, Raven threw himself back into her lap. However, a knock on the door interrupted them, and this put Eiglet on alert. It was the butler announcing Puffin's arrival at the castle. Before he entered, Eiglet hurried Raven to get up immediately, which he did reluctantly and with an irritated expression. The princess couldn't help but notice these details etched on her master's face. But they couldn't be alone for much longer. As Puffin entered the room very excited, announcing her return, the girl referred to him as her beloved Demon King. The girl's eyes sparkled just being in Raven's presence. Then she reported that she had repelled all the humans who dared to cross the border of the demon land. In fact, while hunting them, she took the opportunity to pass by the human army's base. However, Puffin interrupted her report when she noticed Eiglet's presence in her master's room. Staring at the white-haired girl seriously, she was already preparing to put on a show and approached the princess to ask who the hell she was. A question that Eiglet returned, after all. She had never heard of Puffin, who introduced herself proudly, doubting that she really didn't know her and her role in the Demon Army's special task force. But in the game, she had only received the title of Noble Daughter of the Demon King. The mention of the Demon Army's special task force surprised Eiglet, especially since she had never heard of the existence of this squad. Nor did she know that the Demon Army had a special task force, because that name had never appeared in the game. Suddenly, Raven got up from the bed, followed by Puffin, who questioned how he dared to go after another maid when he had her at his disposal. But all he said was that he wanted a general report on the situation. While Owl was doing this task, Puffin stared at Eiglet with great strangeness. She seemed to feel proud to be holding Raven's arm, as if he were her possession. Meanwhile, the princess couldn't help but notice that this girl was like a storm in there. The scene of her saying that Raven already had her and didn't need another maid replayed in Eiglet's mind, which made the girl reflect for a moment, coming to the conclusion that the Demon King had a girlfriend. Something she didn't know, after all. Raven hadn't mentioned anything like that to her before. This seemed to leave our girl sad, but she tried to come to terms with the fact that from the beginning it was clear she would only serve as a body pillow anyway. Maybe it was a good time for her to take a walk around. And so she did, wandering through the hallways, always disguising when confronted by Eiglet. The girl couldn't help but feel bothered by this type of interaction. She thought that maybe it was because of the scene Raven made the other day, saying that she was a human who belonged to him and no one should touch her. Although she didn't like the gossip, now when she went out, no one tried to hurt her. In fact, no one even approached her. While walking, the girl reflected that even when she was in Raven's office, he remained silent. He said nothing to Eiglet, and this bothered her because she missed talking to someone. It was then that she passed by a room where two demons were practicing fencing, which gave her a great idea. She approached the two, interrupting their training, and because of her persistence, she managed to get a sword to join them. Of course, she had almost demanded that they let her train, so it would be hard for them to refuse. Her plan was quite simple. She wanted to strengthen herself and gain more stamina before leaving the Demon King's castle, because to do that, she needed to at least be able to protect herself on the street. It didn't take long for other demons to notice the girl there, asking what she was doing. And one of them explains that the human brought by the Demon King was trying new things. The commotion catches Puffin's attention, who was also passing nearby. She didn't know until then that Eiglet was a human. When she was still alive and a regular player of the game, Eiglet managed to reach the highest levels in all skills. Magic, swordsmanship, everything. But now it was the first time she was holding a real sword. It was quite scary, but she had to do it or she would die of boredom in that huge castle, until someone announces that they could start the fight, which is filled with a very strange feeling. In the audience, Puffin, like the other demons, watched attentively. For some reason, Eiglet's body felt as light as a feather, while she fought for the first time. It didn't take long for the news to reach Raven's ears, and one of his subordinates bursts into his office, informing him that his human was doing something terrible, which triggers an alert in the Demon King. Meanwhile, still in the battle, Eiglet's opponent was underestimating her in his thoughts. He knew he couldn't hurt her, after all. His master was the one who brought her to the castle. So he would take it easy, but he was confident that a few hits would be enough. And Eiglet holds the sword firmly, catching the guy by surprise. In the audience, the demons were shocked by the girl's skills, who pointed the sword at the guy on the ground without any problem, wondering if, even with the dull sword, she could still cause some damage. And the demons watching couldn't believe that this fragile human had managed to subdue a soldier from the demon army. Her opponent was also wondering what the hell that human was. With the shock past, Eiglet realized what she had done, wondering what had happened. After all, her body felt extremely light. It was as if it had moved on its own. She could see all of her opponent's movements and consequently could dodge without much complication. The girl stared at her hands, shocked by the abilities she possessed. She remembered that in the game, humans didn't have magic, so she couldn't use any special spells. And that's why she hadn't noticed her abilities. However, all her stats had reached the maximum level when she was still a player. And apparently this applied to her new body. Of course, it was just a hypothesis, but she couldn't simply dismiss it. It was then that the girl was called to attention by Puffin, who shouted her name. She hadn't even noticed the presence of the demon from earlier until that moment. As she approached, the general introduced herself again, questioning if Eiglet didn't remember her. But for her luck or misfortune, the MC really hadn't paid much attention. After all, she had just woken up. But this excuse made Puffin even angrier. And she draws her sword, challenging the girl to a fight, stating that she didn't know what kind of trick she had used. But seeing a human defeat a demon like that, without cheating, was something that stirred the girl. But Puffin assures the princess not to worry, because she would put her in her place and finish that fight in an instant. To her, Eiglet was nothing more than a stubborn human without any magical power, and she intended to kill her in the blink of an eye, probably because she was part of this squad that she had never heard of. And Puffin seemed to be the Demon King's girlfriend, so maybe she really was strong. being sure that Puffin was a very strong character in that game. But considering the skills she was discovering she had with the sword, she thought she could handle it. Her only problem was the fear of getting hurt if she ended up injuring the Demon King's girlfriend. Speaking of him, Raven was in the corridors along with Owl, looking for the girl. Inside the room, Puffin advances towards the princess, ready to finish her off with her sword. Even so, Eiglet stands firm with her weapon in hand. She wouldn't back down now. In fact, she smiled at the interaction between the two. For her, it was just a training session, so there wouldn't be many problems. And quickly, she takes the sword from the demon's hand, leaving everyone watching the fight with their mouths agape. Puffin's sword flies, embedding itself in the ground accurately. And the girl doesn't even have time to properly process that, wondering what had just happened. She glares at Eiglet, filled with hatred, while the girl kindly asks if she had hurt herself or something like that, despite thinking that she hadn't touched her opponent with the sword at any moment. But this sounds like a provocation to Puffin, who turns as red as a tomato. She charges at the princess, shouting that she had used magic to take her sword, and she complains about the ridiculous color of Eiglet's hair, which made her think she could let her guard down. These accusations make the other demons comment that apparently the girl's hair was dyed with magic, and that was an enormous cowardice, since it seemed that Eiglet had a hidden power. Finally, Raven approaches the room, asking his human what she thought she was doing. Puffin's face lights up with the presence of the Demon King, while the MC realizes she was in trouble. The general rushes to say that this human had committed a cowardice in the midst of the fight, but the Lord pays her no attention and walks right past her, complaining to Eiglet that he had received a notification that the human was trying to take down his entire army. But she explains that it wasn't quite like that. She was actually just participating in sword training, and Raven replies that if that was the case, then it was fine. But he soon picks the protagonist up by the waist, carrying her like a true princess. Eiglet asks him to wait a minute, embarrassed by the situation, and she shouts, asking where he was taking her. And the boy tells her to calm down and stop shouting in his ear, while the princess continues to scold him to let her go. Puffin watched that interaction with strangeness, not knowing what was so special about that human for Raven to care so much. But Owl pulls her out of her thoughts, telling her to report what had actually happened before they arrived. Meanwhile, her master walked through the corridors, still holding Eiglet in his arms, despite the girl trying to get his attention at all costs. She asks if Raven was upset because she almost hurt his girlfriend. And that word, yes, makes the Lord put her down on the ground. He questions what exactly the protagonist was talking about, and that leaves her thoughtful. But she quickly explains that she thought Puffin was the boy's girlfriend or something like that, only for him to explain that the girl was just his subordinate, which leaves the princess feeling awkward. As her response didn't seem very convincing, the Demon King repeats that she was indeed just a subordinate, and he makes a point of saying that he had never, in his entire life, touched one of his employees. His eyes are clearly heavy while he talks to Eiglet, and she changes the subject, asking if he was sleepy, something that Raven confirms, explaining that they had planned to go back to sleep, but they woke him up. So the princess suggests that they could take a nap in bed this time, surprising Raven. Inside the room, Eiglet was already lying on the bed, spreading her hair across the mattress. Her face was the same color as always, since she was in the presence of her master, pink as a tomato. But in reality, we won't find out why those noises were happening, as it only shows Raven approaching, touching her hair and calling her name. And sealing the closeness between the two, it seems like there was an intense kiss. Seriously, why don't they make things clear? Hearing that call, she opens her eyes. Ah, it's explained. It was just our protagonist having a hot dream. She clearly remembered inviting him for a nap in bed. Now, hugging Raven, she was aware that she was just playing her role as a body pillow, so she shouldn't get too attached to him. The next day, the sun shone over that immense castle. Eiglet was having her tea in Raven's office, thinking she would spend another day completely bored. Watching the Demon King do his tasks, she knew he didn't have time to chat with her, so she asked if she could take a walk around the castle, being quickly granted permission by the boy. As she walked through the castle corridors, the gossip about her having ended things with Puffin the day before didn't stop, and people even wondered if she was really a human. Meanwhile, she only thought that she had done something bad the day before, so she probably couldn't train with the same group as before anytime soon. As she turned around, she noticed the little one protecting himself from huge boxes that were about to fall on his head. This triggers an alert in Eiglet, who runs towards the boy, pulling him away and preventing him from having an accident. In Eiglet's arms, the child screams again for his father. who luckily was safe and says that he had scared him. The princess feels relieved. After all, as she expected from demons, they were quite sturdy. With the child in his arms, the man thanks the human for protecting his child. But she explains that he didn't need to thank her. After all, her body had just moved on its own. This brings back memories of her past life when a man from her job thanked her for the help she gave. This causes tremendous anxiety in Eiglet. She knew that it was terrible. And if she continued to meddle in those men's lives, everything would happen again. It was then that she remembered what really happened in her past life. She had been pushed onto the tracks by a man who confused things and thought she was in love with him. How could people be like that? Wasn't it easier just to reject the person? Worried about just being kind could make people interpret her wrong? But the girl was pulled from her thoughts by the little boy in front of her. He asks if she is really okay, or if she is hurt somewhere. But the girl bends down and explains that she is really fine. In fact, she wanted to know if he had hurt himself. Only the little one insists he is fine. However, he explains that his father hurt his hand. The man intervenes, saying it was nothing serious. Although it was somewhat uncomfortable because now he couldn't hold the kitchen knife for a while. The mention of the knife makes Eiglet a bit worried. At least until the child explains that his father is the head chef responsible for the castle's food. He had even thought about asking Owl to send someone to help, but everyone in that castle seemed busy. So if he couldn't manage, he would have to do his work even while injured. This gives the girl a great idea. Sometime later, while leaving the Demon King's room, Eiglet was called to attention. Raven comments that she'd been going out frequently in recent days and wanted to know where to. And since it was always at the same time, he had noticed it wasn't just any walk. So the girl reveals that she was helping with the preparations for the dining hall because one of the cooks got hurt. She even asked Owl for permission to do so. When she asked if she could help, he accepted without hesitation. Although he seemed to doubt Eiglet's intentions, Raven asks why she was doing that. After all, she had been hired by him for another role. But the princess retorts, asking if she didn't always return in time to take their daily nap. And she doesn't wait for Raven to respond before saying goodbye to him and leaving the room, leaving the Demon King standing there. But the young man suddenly gets up, walking through the corridors after the girl. In the dining room, things were going well. Eiglet was friendly, so she interacted with the cooks without any problem. Meanwhile, Raven watched her in silence. While they ate, the demons commented that the human brought by the master was helping in the kitchen because an older guy had gotten hurt, and they had heard a rumor about how she helped clean up after an incident the other day. They praised the girl too much, commenting that despite her seeming cold, she was really nice. They are called to attention by Raven after he hears the conversation, becoming nervous with the Demon King's surprise. But he doesn't even care about the change in atmosphere. He just asks if they really thought that human was kind. Nervously, the creatures reaffirm that she was very kind and never ignored when someone was in trouble. When he returned to his room, Raven couldn't stop thinking about those words. How could Eiglet be kind? He took advantage of her presence there to talk about it, calling her attention. He explains that he had a problem, and she asks what it was about. Then Raven explains that he couldn't do any of his work, which makes the girl suggest that she could fetch Owl, but he says it wasn't necessary. Thus, Eiglet gets up, saying goodbye because her time to help in the dining room was up. The word kind referring to the princess wouldn't leave the young man's mind. After all, now that he stopped to think, she had never treated him in a kind way. Far from there in the kitchen, Eiglet was cutting carrots. Meanwhile, she reflected on the strange behavior that the Demon King had assumed in recent days. He was knocking over documents and complaining that he didn't want to get up frequently. She didn't know exactly what Raven was trying to do. But she couldn't think about it for much longer, as she heard a scream coming from outside the kitchen. She was already ready to deal with the disaster, but came face to face with the Demon King, who was very serious. He approaches the girl and finally asks her directly why she was always cold with him. Eiglet stares at her master as he repeats the question. Why are you always so cold to me? Being honest, she had no idea what that young man was talking about. And it didn't take long for her to realize that the demons around were commenting on their interaction. So she decided to take him to a more private place. With her arms crossed, the girl asks what he was talking about. And the king says he meant exactly what he said, as she always treated him with an inexplicable coldness. This catches the princess by surprise. Raven gives an example that at that moment she only left because she thought someone had done something wrong. But when it was he who was in trouble, she never did anything about it. So she wanted to know the reason for that. The girl didn't know what to answer. She couldn't believe that the adult man in front of her was complaining because she supposedly treated the other demons better than him. So the princess explains that it wasn't as if the Lord was really having any problems. Moreover, she had been hired just to be a body pillow. Therefore, her way of acting shouldn't matter that much. In fact, during those moments when they were together sleeping, the Demon King always acted in a confusing and very strange way, which left our protagonist embarrassed. Raven stares at her for a moment, still not knowing what to say, but they are interrupted when the same scream from before repeats. It was a little girl who was in the corner of the hall, crying for some reason. So Eiglet runs in her direction, abandoning the conversation halfway. This makes Raven sigh, as she already expected this kind of behavior from the girl. She approaches and asks the child what had happened, and the little one explains that she accidentally dropped her doll out of the window up there and it fell outside the castle. That was news to Eiglet. In fact, she had never even left those walls since she arrived. She turns to Raven and asks if she could go outside with the child to get the toy back, something that the young man allows, making it clear that he would have to accompany her in that case. Outside, the guards were always on duty, and they soon notice the Lord's approach. He is polite as he approaches, and one of the knights asks if there is something wrong or any problem regarding security. But Raven denies it, explaining that he was there because of the woman by his side, while Eiglet was holding the child and asking if she remembered where the doll had fallen. The girl points to a tangle of thorns, explaining that it had been there. The Demon King finishes his explanation to the guys, saying that apparently the child had dropped a toy over there. Approaching the thorns, the princess says she thought she could get the bear without any problem. But before she gets closer, the soldiers reprimand her, explaining that those were crystal thorns and therefore very sharp. Then Eiglet asks if there wasn't a way to safely retrieve the toy. He asks what the two guards were doing out there, and one of them explains that apparently there was a doll stuck in the crystal thorns that the child needed. However, it was quite difficult to retrieve it given the conditions. So one of them tells his colleague to find something that could serve as a hook to retrieve the doll. But he is soon reprimanded by the butler, who shouts at the idiots not to abandon their posts. While he lectures the guards, the Demon King approaches the thorns, using his hand to retrieve the doll. When Owl notices this, he screams, drawing Raven's attention while the others watch attentively. But he doesn't pay attention and manages to retrieve the bear, handing it to the man to remove all the thorns from the doll and asking that after that he return the child, with his whole arm injured from the thorns as if it were nothing. Eiglet is amazed by the Demon King, but as soon as she notices all the injuries on Raven's hand, she pulls his other arm, saying that he is bleeding. Her concern seems to surprise him, and the girl looks visibly desperate. She quickly pulls him, stating that they needed to take care of him. The soldiers can't help but notice that their master had a very submissive position in relation to the girl. Meanwhile, the butler does not like what he is seeing at all. Inside Raven's office, she tells him to take off his coat and shirt to treat the bleeding, despite his opposition to this. The girl is shocked by what she sees. The injuries that were there just moments ago were no longer visible on the young man's arms, only a few scratches, which reaffirms that he had said he didn't need to do this. There was no need to stop the bleeding since his magical power healed all his wounds immediately. Still, Eiglet says that he shouldn't have gotten hurt in the first place, and she asks if he didn't feel any pain. The young man thinks before answering, and Eiglet insists. So he explains that maybe she wouldn't understand, but his magical power was immense. So immense that his own body could barely contain it. He remembers his childhood when he was overwhelmed by intense pain throughout his body, and he explains to the girl that because of this magic, he has been tormented by a constant pain throughout his body since he was born. A pain that even Owl did not understand. So he spent a good part of his life exhausted and alone in his suffering, at least until Eiglet appeared. This impresses her, as she did not know she was helping him so much. He continues explaining that even though she had no magic, she served as a vein that could absorb this power infinitely. So using her as a body pillow was an idea he had to improve this absorption through contact. But he did not know exactly what he felt for the girl. His words surprise the princess, who asks if she was really useful to the young man. And Raven replies that if she disappeared, he probably would not live much longer. Even before the saint she always mentioned appeared. In fact, he spent a good amount of time thinking it would be easier if he just vanished. The princess approaches, placing her hand on the young man's face and asks if sucking his powers that way was not painful. Awkwardly, he tries to explain that it was strange. It was as if he had gotten used to feeling that pain. But now that it had disappeared, he felt tremendous fear. For this reason, and for something he did not quite understand, just the thought of losing Eiglet scared him. The two share a moment, and it really seems like a kiss is about to happen. But the protagonist simply hugs him tightly, and Raven asks her to never stay away from him. Sometime after this event, the girl was busy doing her crochet. She couldn't stop thinking about the Demon King, all that magic in his body that had overwhelmed him since he was a child, and how she, a human without any power, managed to absorb it. That was why the Demon King used her as a pillow. And he had said out loud that as long as she stayed close to him, his pain would not be a problem. But deep down, she thought there was another reason to keep her close. Raven picks up the ball of yarn that fell on the floor, handing it to Eiglet and pulling her out of her thoughts. The girl thanks him so distractedly that if it weren't for that, it would have stayed on the floor. The king sits beside her while she continues with her manual activities, and it doesn't take long for Raven to rest his head on the girl's shoulder. Since that day they talked openly, the Demon King had been acting in a more affectionate way with her. When she said she needed an activity to pass the time, he even bought that crochet kit. Apparently, in that world, crochet and embroidery were things noblewomen were supposed to know. Suddenly, they are interrupted by knocks on the door. But Raven stands up, saying there was no reason for that. Instead, he would go meet them at the North Gate. Before leaving, he warns Eiglet that he would be back soon and that she should wait for him there, leaving her alone with Owl, which was definitely very strange for the girl. She tries to break the silence by asking if the commander in question was the girl from the previous day, Puffin. But the butler explains that it was not. Then the chatty princess talks about how the demon army had many soldiers, so it was normal. But Owl counters by saying that lately they had had many more conflicts with the human forces. That was an interesting conversation for Eiglet. After all, it was about the war between humans and demons. She remembers that there was a sacrifice that should have been made to summon the saint, which meant that Eiglet should have been killed. But now that the story had changed, she wondered what direction it would take. If things continued as they were, the saint would not appear, and thus no one would be able to combat the Demon King. But if that were the case, what would happen to the human race in that world? This question made Eiglet wonder if she should talk to Raven and ask him to stop attacking human nations. Unintentionally, she let slip the thought that it would be much better if humans and demons could live in peace. But hearing this, Owl says it was an impossible mission, with the justification that human beings were always selfish and arrogant. He surprises the girl by asking if she did not know that the former Demon King was killed by humans. According to the story, humans invited him to a meeting promising peace, but they trapped his magic and killed him. After that, they launched a surprise attack on the Demon King's castle and ended the lives of everyone present there, massacring adults and children without mercy. Eiglet could not believe that this could be true, as she had never heard this version of the story before. Owl continues to tell that this was why the ancient castle where the demons lived had been destroyed, and those who survived were taken to the forest where the current castle stands while their land was occupied by humans, becoming the Kingdom of Pitterix, the birthplace of Eiglet, who listened to everything in astonishment. Owl explains that when all of this happened, Raven was still in her mother's womb. The woman who escaped carried all the hatred that her ancestors had nurtured for humans, and she died as soon as she gave birth to the new Demon King. The boy, in turn, inherited the curse and the hope of the other monsters that had disappeared, and thus he became the strongest demon in history, at least until Eiglet appeared. But the butler thought it best to keep this last part to himself. Flashbacks of the day the girl came to that castle arise in Owl's mind, from when he asked why he brought Eiglet to his room knowing the danger it could represent. But Raven always replied that the girl had no power, but she could absorb his. And when she was near him, her body felt lighter and free of pain. Moreover, for some reason he did not understand. He never tired of looking at the girl. Her words left the butler very worried, especially since the color of her hair indicated a magical presence, and he had never come into contact with someone without any magic. For that reason, even observing the girl at that moment, he doubted that the color of her hair was real. The butler comments that he had heard she was the princess of the Kingdom of Pitterix, but he questions why a noble, especially a real princess, knew how to use a sword so well, and he wanted to know where she learned all that skill. Before she could answer, she sensed a third presence. It was Raven, who had returned from her activities and confessed to also being interested in knowing the answer to that. She didn't quite know what to say. After all, if she said it was thanks to the games, they wouldn't believe her. Besides, who knows what would happen if she revealed the truth about her past life? To be honest, she didn't even know if she was Yukiko or Eiglet now, which made her question herself constantly, because she had the memories of both lives without any kind of internal conflict, even the memory of having been sacrificed. So she tries to reveal only that she had died once, and that in the other life, this happened a little later than the time they are in now. Her speech makes Raven remember that she had mentioned something about the future before. She adds that she knew it was hard to believe, But for some reason, she had vivid memories of everything that happened before she died. Basically, she had been punished for a sin she didn't quite remember, and then she was sacrificed to summon the holy saint who would defeat the Demon King, which made her think that perhaps she had lived the same life several times. The princess explains that she didn't know why she kept the memories in that new life, but maybe that was why she could use a sword so well. The butler recaps by asking if she was saying that she learned to use the sword in her past lives. Of course, it had been Eiglet who had learned and not Yukiko, but the girl explains that yes, even if in the end it had been useless. Raven asks if the sword was the only weapon the girl knew how to use, and she is honest in replying that she didn't know, as she hadn't tried to use any other type of weaponry. But she thought that as long as her body could move, she should be able to. Then the butler questions if she had any magical power, but the girl was sure she couldn't manipulate it, even though she understood all the theory. It was strange for them to think of someone who had no magic at all. She knew the butler was acting very strangely in the middle of that interrogation, even though he didn't say anything. Raven asks her subordinate if he finally understood that the girl was not a threat. Still, Owl insists, or at least tries to, since he is dismissed by the young man who claims he is being overly protective. His order leaves Owl angry, but even so he leaves, stomping his feet through the office. It doesn't take long for Eiglet to go after him. She finds him in the hallway asking him to wait a moment, calling him Mr. Owl, which he corrects her by telling her to refer to him simply as Owl, and questions if there was anything he could help the princess with. Catching her breath, she says that her words might not mean much to the young man in front of her, but she would not hurt him, and she really wished he would believe that, making the young man question why she cared so much about being understood. Before she could respond, the two are interrupted by some subordinates, calling for Owl to say that someone reported that his child had been kidnapped by other humans. The butler is surprised, questioning the veracity of those facts, but the men were more than certain. They explain that after an investigation, they discovered that the child had been taken by a private military group in a nearby city, and they wanted him to pass the information to Raven. But the butler denies, explaining that he was very busy at that moment. The news of the demon child being captured by some human shocks Eiglet. However, Owl would not leave that situation unresolved and explains that he would handle the matter in place of his master. The princess hesitates, unsure whether to say something or not. But before she can speak, the butler announces that he would take care of it, following the guys to gather more information about the case. While the princess watches him walk away, she wonders what had actually happened. That's when she remembered the story told by Owl earlier about how humans launched a surprise attack on the castle and mercilessly decimated many lives. That makes her question everything she knew so far, because in the story, it was the demons who had tried to take the lands, not the other way around. At least, that was the story told in the game. In the bird that brought the world to dawn, the kingdom of Pitterix was protected by two things: knights and magic. Within the platform, the Demon King was the most dangerous being, for besides despising humans, he also hated the world itself and wanted to end it all at once. But that did not match the image she had of Raven, who had recently revealed that he spent years of his life wishing to disappear to end his own pain. Eiglet can't help but wonder if this change in attitude was just because the two had met. However, there was no way to be sure of that. After all, she had never encountered a story where the character did not end up being sacrificed. If she had followed her normal path, then everything would have happened as the girl already knew. But since that did not happen and she ended up meeting the Demon King, everything changed completely. Even so, the princess had a doubt. The story about the former Demon King must have happened long before she was born in the game. But now was not the time to reflect on that. Since her attention was called, it was Puffin with a sour face as always. Eiglet tries to remember her name unsuccessfully, as the demon interrupts her, informing that she went by Puffin. And then she asks if Owl had already left the castle, which Eiglet confirms. The girl starts to make a scene, asking what they should do. After all, the butler had gone alone to face several human soldiers. Of course, he was strong when it came to magic, but when it came to sword fighting, the man was a failure. So Puffin decides to inform the Demon King about the subordinate's departure. However, she pretends to just realize Eiglet's presence at that moment, pointing to the girl as if she were a great solution, surprising the protagonist, who makes sure that she was indeed referring to her. Puffin approaches and asks if her sword skills weren't better than hers, and argues that if it were a fight between humans, perhaps the opponents would take it easier, so she should go help Owl immediately. She was doing this because the butler had mentioned that the human could just be a spy, so she wanted to speed things up to make Eiglet's mask fall so she could finally get rid of her without Raven protecting her. but to her surprise, the princess agrees. The girl with white hair explains that if she could really help, then she would go and asks Puffin to show her the way she should follow. Meanwhile, a man savors his wine, commenting on how lucky he was. He had captured the demon child and intended to use her as bait to attract adult demons. The young man sitting at the table commented to one of his henchmen that these children were worth a lot of money, and so he could sell them for a high price. However, to his misfortune, Owl was present there, cursing the bastards for referring to his race in that way. Using his powers, Owl makes one of the merchant's wine glasses shatter in his hands, taking advantage of the distraction to recover the child who was being kept in the cage. He jumps out of the window with her quickly, while the humans ran to catch up with him, shouting that they could not let the demon escape. However, when he lands on the ground, he finds himself surrounded by humans, and they are quick to notice the presence of the invader, shouting that someone was attacking them. That was very bad for the butler, as it indicated that someone had activated the magic containment. With the guards around him, Owl was increasingly certain of how humans were the worst race inhabiting that land. It was then that Eiglet appeared out of nowhere, shouting as she flew over the guys. Owl was confused, realizing the presence of the girl, and luckily he managed to catch her in his arms before she hit the ground hard. He shouted, questioning why the princess was there, while thinking that apparently she could indeed use magic and had just been hiding it all this time. But the girl explained that it was Puffin who brought her there, and said she needed to help the boy. This information left the butler disoriented. He would have to exchange a few words with that troublemaker after resolving the situation. He couldn't feel any magic flowing from Eiglet at that moment, so perhaps this was the perfect moment to finish her off for good. But if he did that, the Demon King would probably blame him. Calling his attention, the girl commented that it seemed like he was in great danger. She stared at the humans around them, ready to attack at any moment, and the butler said that it was indeed one way to see things. She questioned why the boy wasn't using his powers to help himself, but he quickly explained that they had used a magic containment in that entire area and he could escape alone, but taking one more adult and a child was out of the question. Noticing Eiglet's presence, the humans mistook her for a demon and prepared to act, making a point to leave them alive despite being captured. One of the guards used his magic to produce a kind of fireball that grew in the direction of the three, but the butler intervened, explaining to Eiglet that he had a power somewhat similar to hers, while the princess held the frightened child in her arms. With just the palm of his hand, Owl stopped the magic, transforming it into a blue flame that was reversed in the direction of the humans. He then finished explaining about his powers, saying that, unlike Eiglet, he could use them in any situation. The princess looked at him fascinated after all. She had just absorbed the enemy's magic and used it herself as a counterattack. The butler covered her with his coat, asking Eiglet to protect the child, while he would take care of the spells cast towards the wall, one by one. The fact that he could use other people's magic left Eiglet amazed. However, it didn't take long for the boy to start getting tired, as there were too many humans for him to handle alone with so much energy, especially since he couldn't absorb that much magical power. So he needed to focus on controlling what he could, when they all came together to make an even bigger magic ball. Realizing that they were forming a very powerful spell, the butler concluded that he wouldn't be able to absorb all that magic. He must be going crazy, and he started to regret not just saving the child and leaving Eiglet alone. However, the girl moved in front of him, protecting him and making him think he had managed to absorb everything without harm. But when he opened his eyes, he realized that it had all been thanks to the girl, who repelled the enemy magic with her abilities. However, he didn't have time to just watch, as Eiglet asked him to teach her how to use another person's power to her advantage. Still, the humans were working hard to make the power ball even bigger. From the top of the tower, the man who had captured the child watched that magic war attentively. He was worried because he knew that the value of demons would drop if they were killed. Even so, Eiglet remained steadfast, protecting both Owl and the child behind her. Inside his castle, the Demon King had no idea what was happening and was signing his papers as usual. It was when he realized that Eiglet had not returned yet and found it very strange. She had followed Owl earlier, but the boy had no idea why. This left the Demon King thoughtful. Owl had been his right-hand man since he was born. He acted in a very protective way, but he would never go against his wishes. Of course, he had his precautions regarding Eiglet, but the boy knew he would never hurt someone he cared about. It was then that he realized what he was thinking. He was referring to the princess as someone he cared about. When had Eiglet become that person? A memory of the day he got hurt came to his mind, when Eiglet touched his face. with a worried expression that in his view was very adorable. Now, he couldn't stop wondering where the girl was and what she was doing as well. Meanwhile, the three were there trying to get rid of those humans. Owl was already getting stressed with her, as she didn't seem to be able to retaliate the fireballs, only absorb them. And he shouts that he had warned her that it didn't work that way, as she couldn't absorb all the magic at once. She had to hold back and use part of it as fuel for her own magic, but she explains that it was too late for that, as she had absorbed everything. The child watched as Owl yelled at the girl to let go already, and she shouted back, explaining that the way he spoke made it seem like all she had to do was vomit or something like that. The butler's main ability was this: to absorb the enemy's magic and convert it into his own magic. If the princess could control this gift, then she would be able to use magic too. That's why she asked him to teach her. And he was trying. While making the necessary movements, Owl explains that while absorbing, she should hold and aim at her target to then throw it back. Observing his instructions, the girl wondered if the man in front of her could really be a good teacher. It didn't take long for him to realize that the girl was lost in thought, and he reprimanded her, saying that she had to pay attention because another attack was on the way, and she positioned herself. While protecting her friends, Eiglet tried to focus on absorbing the magic, being careful not to absorb everything. She closed her hands, as Owl had taught. She took a deep breath. Before the girl could deflect the magic towards the humans, the demon merchant watched everything in shock, unable to believe what was happening, because a great explosion followed. That surprised even Eiglet. But instead of worrying, the protagonist ran towards the butler to hug him, celebrating what she had achieved. Even he was surprised by this, because it wasn't as if she had undergone intense training or anything like that. She managed to deflect even more than that fireball had come, but he couldn't feel happy for her. In reality, he was now worried because if she became an enemy of the demons, that would be a big problem. However, it was difficult to maintain this defense while looking at innocent Eiglet, smiling and thanking the butler, informing him that he didn't have to do these hard things alone anymore, which hit him like a blow to the head. The girl was as happy as a child receiving candy, and she only thought that she needed to practice a little more to improve her skill. Meanwhile, the humans were horrified, because they didn't know that the girl also possessed this ability, and there was no way for them to win like this. Seeing everyone scared, Eiglet felt confused if she had done something wrong, and Owl explained that they were just mercenary humans, so that was the best they could do. However, the butler coldly warned that they had to make sure that the bastard who had captured the child was dead. Eiglet felt confused if the butler was really serious. In the rubble that remained of the tower after the explosion, the demon merchant crawled. When the butler found him, he quickly drew his sword, shouting for him to die. But he heard a desperate scream for him to stop. It was Eiglet. But the butler asked, why on earth would he do that? He didn't understand the reason to prevent the inevitable. Then she explained that there was a child watching that, and he shouldn't teach a child that revenge was about violence. The two stared at each other in silence with a strong tension in the air, until Owl realized that he wouldn't be able to convince her. So he asked if they should just let that disgusting human go unscathed from the situation. But she explained that she had an even better idea. Although the butler doubted it a lot, he accepted. The idea was precisely to tie the merchant to a tree with a sign around his neck for the crowd to see. The sign read that he had kidnapped a child and deserved punishment. So he should stay that way. Back at the demon's castle, Eiglet asked if the little one had reunited with his parents, to which Owl replied that probably yes. But now it was time to give a report to the Demon King about their activities. Before he reached his master's room, he received a shout. The butler explained that he didn't think the situation was serious enough to interrupt his master's activities, especially when he was so busy. But Raven was completely furious, surrounded by a horrifying aura, enraged at the thought that Eiglet had been taken without his permission. His exaggerated reaction even surprised Eiglet, especially with all the magic around. Quickly, she jumped with her arms around his neck, embracing him, trying to absorb all that magic flowing through his body, which seemed to calm the young man. While the butler stared at the scene, shocked by the fact that she had managed to do that. After all the absorption, the girl seemed exhausted, and she was carried by Raven again, who now seemed much calmer. When Owl tried to talk to him, the king ordered him to stay away. However, still not 100% warning, or rather threatening anyone to come near the area of his room, Raven takes Eiglet to his room immediately, placing the girl who seemed exhausted on the bed. He was clearly worried. He couldn't help but wonder why Eiglet had followed the butler, and, more importantly, why he took the girl outside the castle. He was being consumed by a hatred he had never felt before. As he pondered this, which made his magic go out of control. But he was caught off guard by the girl's touch, who asks if it hurt. The Demon King looks at her, embarrassed by the sudden touch, and gently holds her hand close to her cheeks, confirming that yes, he felt a bit of pain. He slowly leans in, pressing his face against the princess's, who is still lying down. Getting a little closer, Raven pronounces Eiglet's name as if it were the most precious thing in the world. My God, show if they kissed or not. What hatred. And she couldn't help but notice that her master's magic continued to linger in the air, which made her think that this was because Owl had gone out alone to resolve his issues, hoping to neutralize all the bad feelings that the Lord was experiencing. While enveloping him, Eiglet thought she could adjust Owl's technique to absorb the Demon King's magic. But apparently, that wasn't possible. All that power, Raven had caused tremendous physical pain, not just because of the quantity, but because of the quality of being on another level. At that point, with so many feelings on edge, Eiglet already felt uncomfortable. It was a dense and heavy magic. It was almost dark and overwhelmed her to a certain extent. Her eyes were already watery, indicating that she wouldn't be able to hold on much longer. The Demon King takes a step back, observing the girl who now no longer had a serene expression on her face flushed as she looked at her contractor, and he slowly takes off his coat. Slowly, the prince removes his gloves so he could touch Eiglet's delicate face while calling her. It was still strange for her to hear the boy say her name so close. But this time, instead of staying silent, she responds, calling for Raven, who again says the princess's name. Please, if you're going to kiss, do it in a way that we can see. Thank you. It was as if she were burning in flames while watching him until he got closer. Here it comes, and enveloped her lips with a kiss. Finally. So cute. This time, a real kiss. And not just the fruit of Eiglet's imagination, like on a previous night. That had been the first time she saw the Demon King so furious about something. After all, he usually behaved in a cold and hard-to-read manner. But now, with the man in front of her whom she was staring at so deeply, it was as if he were transparent. But even after they separated from the kiss, she could see his magic flowing. Although he tried to suppress it, the girl knew that if she let him pull away, she would feel physical pain again. And so she hugs him, reminding him that she was his pillow, and he didn't need to hold back, encouraging him to let the magic flow. Her words and gesture leave the king stunned, but even so, he obeys, enveloping the girl in a magical embrace to feel a bit of relief in his body and heart. The next morning, Owl was at his master's door, thinking that he couldn't let him sleep forever, so he knocked on the door, asking for permission to enter. When he was surprised by an unexpected scene, Raven was lying on Eiglet's lap, shirtless. Apparently, someone has a habit of undressing while sleeping, and seeing that left the butler embarrassed for some reason. Outside, rumors were already spreading among the demons Puffin was also around. Listening to the conversation of the other demons and enviously wondering how this happened after all his effort. After that night, the girl returned to her crochet activity. While the Demon King yawned, lying in her lap, while reviewing some documents, Eiglet had no idea how they had come to be so close. But sometimes she caught the boy peeking at her while she knitted. It didn't take long for him to fall asleep, as if Eiglet had some kind of enchantment that magically put him to sleep. If you stop to think, her new master was like a cat, because his hair was soft and he had large horns which reminded her of ears. Ever since the princess prevented the king from going berserk days ago, she noticed that his behavior had changed a bit, even though he had already been acting strangely before that. But now he was always calling for the girl, asking where she was going and requesting that she stay by his side. She just hoped that this behavior wasn't a consequence of her having absorbed too much magic from him. Now Raven followed her wherever she went, and since Owl was starting to complain that the boy wasn't doing his work anymore, he decided to spend a good part of his time in the boy's office. He suddenly wakes up and asks what was wrong with Eiglet, who is looking at him in a very strange way. Laughing because she was thinking just that, she simply replies that the children would arrive at the kingdom soon, so she needed to go. This makes Raven sulk, as he didn't want to be separated from his beloved. Reluctantly getting up and sitting at his desk, it doesn't take long for a little boy to enter, accompanied by the girl whom Eiglet rescued the doll from another day, asking her to teach them how to knit again. Sitting on the carpet, Eiglet shows the children how it's done. Raven carefully observed their interactions. For him, it was good that Eiglet wasn't leaving his side as much as she had been doing lately, but her attitude remained the same. He watched how happy she was interacting with the children. Reflecting on how the girl acted so coldly towards him, he didn't know where he was getting that from. In fact, since the day he almost lost it because she left, she hadn't bothered to say his name out loud anymore. The children noticed the change in the atmosphere and questioned what was wrong with the Demon King. It was as if he were covered in a dark aura. Eiglet had already noticed that this had become a habit and was happening again. So she asks if maybe he didn't like children very much. Hearing this, the little girl runs towards the Demon King's desk. She extends her hand with 2 flowers for him. She had made them with Eiglet's help and seemed quite proud. But Raven stares at her in silence, not understanding what she wanted. Awkwardly, the girl apologizes for bothering him, but she didn't want him to hate her or the other boy who was with her. Both Eiglet and the child watched her attentively, and her sentence makes Raven's eyes widen, and he expresses a brief smile. Before taking the gifts from the girl's hand, he observes the small flowers and compliments her for being very pretty, making a point to comment that they matched him. His reaction surprises the little girl. However, before she could say anything, he explains that it wasn't enough, leaving the little one confused. He gets closer to the girl, explaining that it wasn't enough because he wanted them to make a few more. Eiglet observed his attitude with the girl, which made her think that maybe he did like children and was irritated about something else. The gaze of the two ends up meeting. He looks away, embarrassed. This makes Eiglet feel shy too, not knowing exactly why. She didn't know how to behave. Seeing Raven interact with children was very cute, and she had no idea he could behave so well around kids. The little boy calls her attention, asking for more guidance on his knitting, and she pretends to be paying attention to help. After a while, the atmosphere in the room returns to normal, and Owl arrives with his tea cart. He tells the children to return to their tasks for now, and not to disturb the Demon King. Then they happily say goodbye to Eiglet, and politely ask the princess to teach them more things the next day. With them alone, Raven tries to get closer, sitting next to the girl, and asks what they had been working on all afternoon, to which Eiglet replies that she noticed her master's horns were getting caught in the sheets and sometimes even tearing the pillowcases, so she wanted to make a kind of cover to help. The boy exclaims, asking if that frilly thing was for him, and Eiglet confirms, somewhat embarrassed. Seeing the boy deep in thought, she didn't know if she had gotten the gift right or not. But noticing that he was also as red as a tomato, she ends up bursting into laughter. Owl serves tea for the two. While the girl announces that it was ready, her master tries the gift and asks the butler if he liked it. Poor Owl, not in all his long life had he ever imagined seeing this scene, and ends up spitting all the tea in shock. But he is reprimanded by the Demon King, who tells Owl to compose himself. Meanwhile, in the middle of the forest, Puffin was reading a kind of paper with a sordid plan. She was willing to do anything to harm Eiglet, and if she couldn't do it directly, she would kill her, and then find a way to make it look like a simple accident. The butler then hands a bag to Eiglet. It was full of coins, and he explains that it was her salary for the month worked. Upon seeing that amount in front of her, the girl is shocked, as she could buy anything with that money. Sometime later, she asks Raven if there was a little shop nearby, which he confirms, and then asks for his permission to go shopping. However, the Demon King explains that if she needed anything, he could take care of it. But the girl approaches, excited, explaining that she wanted to go alone because she enjoys shopping. His response makes the guy sigh, but he allows the princess to go out, just asking her not to go alone. Then the girl heads to the castle's shopping area, which was always crowded after all. The Demon King's castle housed both Raven's soldiers and common demons. Eiglet was amazed by so many stalls. When she found the stand of the items she was looking for, she was sure it would be there. But she hadn't gone before because she didn't have any money to spend. Now, the situation was different, and she had so much money in hand that she didn't even know where to start. So, she decided to focus on weapons and armor. But she also wanted to see the magical items. Because inside the castle, she wouldn't be able to practice using magic on other people. While she was looking, Puffin was following her. Who thought the human was locked in the king's office without being able to leave? But now wondered what the girl was doing. That's when she saw a scene she literally didn't expect. Eiglet was holding a sword from the sail, making Puffin wonder how the girl could do that, considering it was a very heavy weapon. After all, she was just an ordinary human. The general runs towards her, determined to eliminate the girl, believing she was an imposter. The protagonist had no idea of the danger and continued looking at the weapons. However, suddenly the crazy one knocks Eiglet to the ground. She shouts at the princess, reprimanding her for her actions, and tells Eiglet to look her in the eyes, but the protagonist was completely distracted because she had found a very special item. Eiglet was excited because it was made of the main material of the synthesis weapon she used to like, and that's why her eyes were shining. Puffin tries to regain her attention, but the girl just asks her to wait a moment and runs towards the vendor asking how much the dagger cost. That leaves the general speechless. She wasn't used to being ignored like that, and she wondered who Eiglet thought she was to do something like that. She was willing to end the girl's life right there, while Eiglet completed her purchase with all the kindness and politeness as always. As she continued walking through the fair, the protagonist thought that the curse contained in the dagger wouldn't affect her since she had no magic at all. And apparently, if she brought the necessary materials, they would process the magic for her. The only problem was that the princess still didn't know exactly what she would synthesize with those items. Maybe she could try with a couple of Dragonian items, but for that, she needed to go to the forest. Her thoughts are interrupted when Puffin shouts for the girl with a not-so-friendly face. However, for the first time, her presence is something positive for Eiglet, who thinks she could take the girl with her to the forest. After all, she was a high-level demon and thus quite strong. So she doesn't let the girl say anything, just runs towards her excitedly and asks if she would like to go to the forest with her, giving the excuse that she wanted to pick some apples that grew there, and if she said she was going with Puffin, the Demon King would probably allow her to go. Although they weren't friends, that was a great opportunity for the general to get rid of Eiglet without raising suspicions. So she decides to accept the invitation, which surprises the protagonist, who had no idea that this could be her last day. Sometime later, in the middle of the forest, a hand emerges from a puddle of mud. Luckily, someone throws a rope in the direction of the person in trouble. It was Eiglet asking Puffin to hold on tight, while the demoness could only wonder why this was happening to her while she was immersed in mud. After helping her colleague, the protagonist asks if she was okay, confessing to being surprised when the other simply jumped into the puddle. But Puffin justifies that she hadn't been careful and ended up slipping. In reality, she knew she wouldn't have fallen so easily if Eiglet hadn't moved at the last moment. Since our girl had no idea of the plan, she comments that she was glad the girl didn't end up falling into a bottomless pit. And Puffin laughs in agreement, even though she knew it actually was a bottomless pit. But she wouldn't give up. There were still other traps in their path. She watches every step Eiglet takes attentively, passing through various vines. But she doesn't step on any, surprising Puffin, who asks the girl to wait a little. Once again, the villain ends up falling into her own trap, being pulled by one of the carnivorous plants and startling Eiglet, who screams her name. Even after that scare, the general didn't give up. She was sure that this time the girl would fall into the trap she had devised with several wolves. Another plan of Puffin seemed to be going down the drain because Eiglet was thinking of everything except the danger. In fact, at that moment, she could only think that she was hungry. Suddenly, the wolves retreat, as if they were dying of fear of the girl, surprising Puffin once again. She didn't know what kind of luck Eiglet had, but still she didn't lose faith in the next traps she set during their walk. Noticing that her companion was completely worn out, Eiglet asks if she is okay. After all, she seemed to be having a terrible streak of bad luck that day, and the protagonist leans closer to her face to clean it with a cloth she was carrying. She treats Puffin with care, asking her not to exert herself too much. Changing the subject a bit, the girl asks if the protagonist doesn't want to pick the apples. That's when a reality shock hit her, and she wonders why she had gone to the forest to pick apples when there were plenty for sale at the store near the castle. But the girl couldn't think much about it, as the shadow of a monstrous creature loomed over them. It was an enormous dragon that roared loudly. Not only that, but a red dragon quickly recognized by Puffin. While her friend seemed scared, Eiglet was happy to have found it, and she let slip. Then Puffin understood that those were the true apples Eiglet had been talking about from the beginning. Thus, the protagonist explains that since the red dragon was there, the fruit she was really looking for, the dragon apple, must be nearby. This rare item was a kind of demonic apple that, according to rumors, was born from a dragon's breath. Since it grew near dragon nests, obtaining one was extremely difficult. The monster in front of the girls roared loudly, completely annoyed by their presence there. Even Puffin felt fear of the creature. She looked at the protagonist seriously. She couldn't believe that this girl was after an apple like that and wondered why she wanted such a dangerous and practically useless item. Besides questioning who that girl really was, who didn't even flinch in front of an enormous dragon. In that world, besides humans, there were demons and all kinds of magical creatures. Some animals formed bonds with humans, like dogs and cats. Others served as livestock, like cows and horses. The same happened with some magical creatures that formed bonds with demons. But dragons were completely opposite to this rule. After all, they possessed immense magic, were very intelligent, and had a strength impossible to compete with. so they were not creatures that could be tamed by humans or demons. However, Eiglet was determined, and in her mind, with both of them in this situation, everything would work out. Then, the girl runs towards the beast, disappearing from Puffin's side in the blink of an eye, and even leaving the creature confused. As she approached, the protagonist only thought that this was a very clever dragon. There was no way to win in a fight against it using a dagger that hadn't even been synthesized yet. Therefore, her main focus now was to find the apple. The vendor had imbued the synthesis enchantment into the weapon as soon as the girl bought it, so she would be able to use it the moment she harvested the fruit. When she located the human, Puffin wondered what the hell she was doing. To be honest, she just wanted it to be over soon and for the protagonist to be crushed and die. But if that happened, she would be left alone with that beast, and escaping would become an even more difficult task. When she looked up, Eiglet realized the tree that was in front of her. Finally, she had found the apples she had been searching for, so she headed towards the fruits without even hesitating. However, the dragon let out a roar behind the girl, launching its flame into the air. Puffin scolded the girl, trying to explain that wandering around like that was dangerous. She thought the human was a real idiot and began to think that her best option would be to run away while the white-haired girl was attacked. However, Eiglet didn't pay any attention. As soon as she managed to grab one of the apples, she ignored everything around her, using the dagger to make a small cut which illuminated everything around her. That left the demon completely stunned in shock. The protagonist was synthesizing a weapon. Finally, the general understood Eiglet's true plan with that trip to the forest. Finishing this task, our girl runs again, preparing to reach the dragon, and hitting it quickly, leaving the creature lying on the ground. Now, that simple weapon had become a demon apple dagger, thanks to her actions. And this was a super rare item. After all, it was a blade made with the synthesis of a fresh dragon apple, and a cursed dagger that became sharper the more it was soaked in dragon blood. Therefore, as soon as the blade touched the skin of such a beast, it killed it instantly. Even knowing the theory, Eiglet was surprised to realize that using that item really made the task of killing a dragon much simpler. The girl wasn't really feeling guilty. After all, this type of magical creature recovered over time. And because of that, they were great for increasing magic levels. In reality, she was more impressed with the fact that her body had moved better than she thought it would. And the dragon also seemed to move slower than expected. Observing the blade, she thought she couldn't call what had just happened training, but she wished it had been a little more challenging. However, a movement caught the attention of our girl and Puffin, who once again looked scared. Suddenly, 4 red dragons surrounded the girls, and Puffin, terrified, warned that there was one more coming out of the nest. Unlike her, Eiglet was very excited, with a smile from ear to ear, and the demon asked why she was smiling so much. The girl felt like a child receiving candy with that happening, because now she could really train, and in the worst-case scenario, she would escape using Puffin's teleportation magic. Later, when they returned to the castle, the Demon King looked the girls up and down before asking if they had just gone shopping, to which Eiglet replied that she really went shopping, but what she really wanted was in the middle of the forest. Then she called Puffin to accompany her. The girl was covered in scratches, and her clothes were a complete rag. It was enough for Raven to say Puffin's name out loud, to scare the girl, who ran out of the office. Eiglet watched her carefully. She had always wondered what kept Puffin so busy. After all, she usually stuck to Raven like a sloth. But her thoughts were interrupted by a sudden approach from the boy. He enveloped her in a tight hug. The protagonist didn't know exactly the reason for this affection, but the Demon King hugged her gently, stroking her white hair, happy that she was safe. This made Eiglet embarrassed. Then the Lord asked her to change her clothes immediately. Inside the bathroom, the hot steam took over. To everyone's surprise, there they were, both naked, sitting in the bathtub as if it were nothing. The protagonist seemed to be blushing from the situation while our Demon King continued on his mission to turn the story into 18+. 30 minutes earlier, the boy had hugged her, saying he could smell blood. This caught Eiglet's attention, who questioned, "What do you mean?" And the boy concluded that it was her blood and asked if she was hurt. That's when she realized she might have scratched herself somewhere, but she made it clear to the Lord that it was no problem, really. However, he looked at the girl seriously, leaving her even more awkward. After a long sigh, the Demon King said he didn't trust any of her words and, therefore, ordered her to take off her clothes. This request left Eiglet completely stunned. This was the excuse for them to be in that situation, and now he held her hands with as much delicacy as possible to check for injuries. Embarrassed, Eiglet asked if that bath had any healing effect, because she believed she had already healed all her wounds by that point. While gently kissing the girl's hand, Raven explained that she still had injuries on her skin, but Eiglet thought this was all an excuse for the two to take a bath together. After all, the Demon King had been acting very strangely lately. Even the way Raven expressed himself was kinder and sweeter. She knew she was in an autumn game, but as far as she knew, the Demon King was not a love interest for the protagonist. And even if he were, Eiglet was not the protagonist of that game. The boy looked at her intently with his dark eyes, before bringing one of Eiglet's fingers to his mouth. This movement startled the girl, who quickly pulled her hand back, explaining that she wasn't feeling any pain anymore, so she wanted to get out soon. But Raven pulled her closer in the bathtub. Gently, he asked Eiglet not to leave again without telling him. And noticing her silence, he confirmed that she understood, making her tremble. The Demon King was giving small kisses on her neck while asking Eiglet to promise that. He holds the girl as if she were the most precious thing in the world, and repeats her name in search of a response. The girl was all dazed by the feeling of the boy's hands passing over her body under the water. How so? Shocked. The poor thing, looking like a bell pepper, can only manage a desperate okay. Even so, the boy insists that she promise, and so she does. The Demon King smiles and lets Eiglet settle in the bathtub as she wishes. It was always like this. Her master never took anything seriously, and that was something that bothered Eiglet, especially since she had been used as a pillow more times than she could count and had also been touched by the Demon King. But he had never actually held her. To him, she was just a pillow, and the girl had to keep in her thoughts that his actions were driven by curiosity or pity. In any case, it wasn't as if she wanted to be with him or anything like that, but it bothered her because since Raven didn't want anything to do with her, he could at least stop touching her that way. Because even if he had no feelings involved, it didn't mean she was available for His Majesty to do as he pleased. While she got lost in thought, Raven watched her closely. And then, he reveals that he had received a report from Owl about how Eiglet had learned to use magic. And she confirms this, explaining that it was the butler who taught her. And now she could reflect her opponent's magic back at them. Curious, the protagonist asks if he had known about this all along. To which he responds with another question, wanting to know if the girl was trying to hide the game. But that wasn't the case, and she explains that it wasn't really her intention. But since the boy hadn't brought it up, she thought he wasn't interested. But Raven explains that his butler didn't hide anything from him, which raises a red flag in the protagonist's mind. Until the Lord explains that, honestly, whether she could use magic or not was indifferent to him. Something she asks if it was because she was a body pillow, only for Raven to explain that it wasn't exactly that. In fact, it was because, at the end of the day, Eiglet was exactly who she was, with or without magic, which meant that her lack of power hadn't changed overnight, because it made it seem like the Demon King liked her for who she was, and that left her confused. Realizing she was lost in thought again, Raven calls for the girl, who changes the subject, saying it was nothing, and comments on when she tried to direct her master's magic and it didn't work. But he suggests it was because her power was too strong, making Eiglet ask if, depending on the intensity, she wouldn't be able to manipulate the magic. Then, the boy explains that if she used all her magic, she would probably incinerate the Demon King's castle, something the girl must have felt. And that's why she chose to absorb so much power at once to save the creatures that were in danger. Eiglet interrupts him, explaining that she hadn't thought of something like that. But Raven explains that some decisions come from the unconscious. Besides, he knew her well enough by this point. However, if she ever needed to, she would be able to use the same magic as him. This makes Raven explain that if she were by his side, he would give her all the magic she wanted. After all, he didn't need it. Even so, she contests. This is enough to make the Demon King very happy, agreeing with the girl. Later, when they were lying in bed, Eiglet informs her master that she dealt with the red dragons, and the mention of the multiple creatures piques Raven's interest. So she explains that she synthesized a weapon and ended up creating the apple dagger and decided to test it. It took a while, but the guilt began to weigh on Eiglet's shoulders, who questions if she had done something terrible. Trying to ease her guilt, the Demon King suggests that they both go for a walk and take a look at the state of the red dragons. Leaving the room, the Demon King puts on his gloves to get ready. He was already completely dressed to go out with the girl, who finds him peeking at the horizon through the window. Upon noticing her presence, Raven asks if she is ready, which the girl confirms, now wearing a more delicate outfit. As usual, the Demon King holds her in his arms, and despite how often he did this, Eiglet couldn't help but feel embarrassed. The boy informs the butler that they are leaving, and Owl asks them to be careful. Thus, the Lord uses his wings to carry the girl. While they flew, Eiglet watched him closely. During the bath, the Lord had said they would visit the dragon's nest that day, a scene she couldn't get out of her head. But the girl didn't know exactly what he meant when he invited her. After all, he even had Owl prepare lunch for the two of them. In the midst of his thoughts, the Demon King announces that they were about to land. They carefully touch down on the ground, and soon they come face to face with a dragon apple. It was then that the princess realized they were in front of the same tree she had encountered before, which meant this was the place where the girl with white hair had taken down all the dragons by herself. Suddenly, they come across 3 enormous creatures, and just their presence makes the protagonist reach for her dagger, ready to attack if necessary. However, Raven steps in front of her, asking the dragons if their boss was around. One of them approaches, commenting that it had been a while since he last saw the Demon King. Seeing that giant creature in front of her was terrifying, and the dragon comments that the boy took a long time to show up, but he was lucky to have arrived just after they were reborn, referring to Raven as the incredible Demon King of that era. The scene leaves Eiglet speechless. How could those creatures talk? It was such a big surprise that the princess found herself wondering if that was really the voice of the dragon. Noticing the girl's presence, one of the creatures asks if she was part of Raven's group and would like to know more about her true identity. The Demon King answers the first question and explains that she was actually the princess of the sacred kingdom of Piterix, which piques the dragon's curiosity about the girl's name. She is introduced as Eiglet. The creature repeats her name a few times, until the image of a woman with pink hair comes to its mind, and the creature thanks her, referring to Eiglet as the daughter of Princess Toki of the White Heron. This confuses Eiglet, so she asks what exactly she was being thanked for. Before she receives her answer, Raven interjects, explaining that the red dragons were high-level magical creatures, and although few people knew this, they could communicate. And because they were very proud creatures, they didn't usually do so with just anyone. The dragon justifies this by stating that their race always sought the strongest and had no interest in alliances with weak people. This is because, for the red dragons, death was just a part of their natural cycle, which meant that, just like in the game, the red dragons there were also almost immortal. However, the chief explains that since no one else had come after them to hunt them, they ended up aging. And thanks to Eiglet having killed them, their entire clan could be reborn in that way. This makes sense in the girl's mind, who now had a plausible explanation for why those creatures moved so slowly. With this explanation, the demon tries to cheer the little one up, saying that in reality she didn't need to feel sad about anything she did. A bit awkwardly, the girl agrees. Again, the chief dragon thanks the princess and offers to grant any wish of hers, asking what she would like. Eiglet thinks for a moment before asking them to fight with her because she needed to train. Her request catches the Demon King's attention, who becomes worried. He reprimands the princess, but it is too late, as her request is granted by one of the dragons. Quickly, the 3 beasts present surround the girl, who already had her dagger ready. Raven shouts her name, but Eiglet pays no attention, running towards the red dragons as if she were a child in an amusement park. He remains alert to all the girl's movements, but he is called to attention by one of the creatures that was not involved in the fight, commenting that it was the first time he had seen the king so excited, despite him denying it and trying to change the subject by explaining that Eiglet had been born without any magical power, and that was why he wanted them to take it easy on her and not hurt her. It was strange to see him acting that way, considering that he once used his magic to drive those creatures away just because he was frustrated. But the dragon tries to reassure him, saying that he didn't need to worry so much. After all, the girl was quite strong, and the dragons explain that the girl had slipped off the cliff. He barely managed to finish his sentence before the king rushed off in search of his princess. Eiglet was falling freely, desperate about what could happen. It was almost embarrassing that she got so distracted by the fight that she ended up falling off a cliff without realizing it. While falling, she wondered if this would really be her end, ready to say goodbye to her reincarnation. But she wasn't that worried after all. Maybe she would just reincarnate again and live that life from the game once more. However, before she hit the ground, she was caught by a surprise. It was Raven, carrying her in his arms with a worried expression, while Eiglet's eyes remained closed, fearing that scolding how. He calms down upon noticing the girl's expression and only asks her to try to be more careful next time. The protagonist opens her eyes, realizing that her boss's concern is genuine, and then she apologizes for the way she acted. Meanwhile, elsewhere, a woman had a sour expression and was staring at a large red dragon that was trapped in a cell. Sometime later, Eiglet offers a bit of tea to the Demon King while they eat in the garden. The girl savored a sandwich, probably made by Owl, and the Demon King couldn't take his eyes off her. watching how she got messy while eating and licking her lips in a failed attempt to clean herself. Raven was watching her intently until he decided to approach, using his hands to wipe the dirt from the girl's cheek. But that was enough to make her blush and feel awkward, especially seeing the Lord lick his own bread-stained finger. Her face began to burn. She didn't know why she had done that. Of course, the sandwich was tasty, but that was too much. Noticing the way he was looking at her, the young man asks if there was a problem, and the princess is completely at a loss for words, thinking that he was becoming more attractive as the days went by. In any case, the girl shrugs, explaining that she was like this because he had touched her so suddenly. But Raven takes the opportunity to make a pun, stating that it was a bit late for her to act that way over a simple touch. Not that he was wrong. However, this kind of situation had never happened before between the two. In fact, more dubious things had already occurred, which made the girl wonder if this was normal behavior for her master, recalling when she met Puffin, and how Raven was right to say that she wasn't his girlfriend. Still, the two seemed to be quite close, so Eiglet decides to take a chance and asks what kind of girl Puffin was. The mention of his commander is a surprise to Raven, and realizing the blunder he had made, the princess changes the subject, saying it was nothing and could be left alone. The young man explains that she was the type of woman who led the special task force of the demon army, which was not a satisfactory answer for Eiglet, although she didn't say that out loud. Raven thinks for a moment whether he should say more or not. Then, he makes it clear that she was one of his most loyal subordinates, just like Owl. This last part resonates in the protagonist's mind, who continues her barrage of questions, wanting to know if Puffin liked the Demon King. Only for Raven, this was very simple. No one in the castle disliked him. There was such confidence, changing the subject a bit. He approaches the princess and questions why. After so long working for him, she still called him by his title. After all, Eiglet knew his name, and he confirms that, making the girl repeat out loud, "Raven," to which he responds with a, "That's right, Eiglet." She was already used to feeling awkward next to the young man, and couldn't help but notice how different his personality was compared to what was shown in the game. Earlier, when they were still in the forest, Raven spoke with one of the creatures that had mentioned something about a dragon captured by humans. And the monster confesses that he shouldn't have brought up the subject with the Demon King, but he knew that he was waging a war against humans, and if he knew anything, he would like his troops to go after the red dragon. Reflecting on this now, the protagonist realized that to capture a dragon, it would have to be humans from the kingdom of Terex. In the meantime, Puffin was prowling around the castle while thinking about how dangerous Eiglet was, especially since even high-level demons were afraid of dragons. Moreover, if she was indeed a human, she represented a threat to the Demon King. That made her seethe with rage. She couldn't conceive the idea of some random human getting so close to her lord. Memories of her childhood come to mind, and Puffin remembered that she had always heard that the Demon King was someone frightening. But when he saved her after she was captured by humans, his eyes seemed lonely, and that's why the girl wanted to be useful to him. So, she went through the worst training possible and became the youngest official soldier of the demon army. In fact, she was the one responsible for creating the special task force and expanding the castle's borders, all to eliminate anyone who got in Raven's way. From the very beginning, Puffin's mission was to do everything possible to be useful to her master. But now, even Owl had been deceived by that human, leaving Puffin completely abandoned. In the end, he knew nothing about Eiglet. They had told him she was human, yet Owl refused to speak more about her origin. Therefore, he decided to mingle among the people, and by chance, he came across a group discussing how the Prince of Pitterix was looking for a girl with white hair. One of them commented that the girl had tried to kill the queen, and the other affirmed that the soldiers could only talk about that, searching for any clues. Meanwhile, inside the castle, Eiglet's stepmother observes her new prey. It had been almost 2 months since Eiglet had disappeared from there. She clearly remembered her being taken by the Demon King, and at this point she presumed that her stepdaughter must already be dead. But until she could see her unconscious body with her own eyes, she would not feel peace. The woman is called by one of her subordinates, explaining that someone was asking for an audience with the prince, and Maina questions what kind of matter they would like to discuss. Then the young man explains that this person claimed to have seen the woman with white hair that the prince was looking for, and this news shakes the woman. She smiles upon concluding that her stepdaughter was indeed alive. Happy with the news, Maina states that she would take care of the matter. After all, her son was very busy. Allowing the subject to enter, the guards shout for him to kneel, informing him that the queen had granted the audience. A hooded lady bows to the queen, who asks if she is the person who saw the woman sought by the prince. Finding a traveling witch was at least unusual, and Maina asks for the person's characteristics about her age and body, to which the woman replies that she was probably at the end of her teenage years and was a girl with long white hair and golden eyes. These characteristics make Maina's eyes widen, and she shouts for her to tell everything about this person and lift her head, something Puffin does with pleasure. Meanwhile, far from there in the Demon King's castle, Eiglet had no idea what awaited her. Two demons walking through the palace commented on how the human army had not made any more attempts to attack lately, which was indeed strange, as they had always been so brave, and one of them wondered what had happened. But deep down, they didn't care about humans in general. And speaking of humans, something his colleague confirms, assuring that he was referring to the girl who was always with the Demon Lord, although he didn't know why she was a princess. Stopping to think, even Owl had called the girl that, which makes him suggest that perhaps she really was part of the monarchy in the human world. But getting back on track, one of the guys asks what happened with the protagonist, and his friend reveals that something happened the other day after his training. He was sitting on a bench, recovering from the pain of the training, when a shadow blocked his light. It was Eiglet, asking if he was okay, or if he had hurt himself. When he realized she was a human, the boy changed the subject, saying it was nothing. However, the girl seemed quite worried, saying that if he had really hurt himself, it was better to treat it quickly. And careful as she was, she made a point of bandaging the fighter's arm carefully. Interrupting the story, his friend mocks him, asking if it was at that moment that he fell hopelessly in love with the girl, which the boy says would never happen. However, he confesses that after that incident, he started to think that humans like her really existed. The Demon King, who was passing through the nearby corridors, ends up overhearing part of the conversation, in which one of the boys reveals a rumor about someone being in love with the princess inside the castle, which surprises his friend. In his office, Raven reflected on the events from earlier. So there was someone in his own house in love with Eiglet. Unfortunately for him, he couldn't hear the person's name. However, he was immersed in his thoughts, wishing to know who could have gotten so close to Eiglet that they fell in love. After all, the girl wandered around everywhere, had already participated in training with the soldiers. She helped the staff in the cafeteria, and even interacted with demon children and their parents, which made the list of suspects very extensive. Thinking of the girl this way made the Demon King's blood boil. After all, the princess was naive. She was not used to that world and trusted any demon too easily, besides being someone soft and involved in various matters. Even so, it was very difficult to read what was going on in the girl's head, and sometimes Raven felt as if she would simply disappear into thin air whenever he looked the other way. When they met, he thought she could be interesting. After all, it wasn't every day that he found a hidden princess without any power who was very different from him, since magic seemed to be just waiting to jump from his body. But before he could realize it, there she was, enchanting him while calling his name. Just remembering the girl made the Demon King feel awkward. His session of thoughts is interrupted by knocks on the door. It didn't take long for her to notice the frown forming on the Demon King's face, and then she asked what had happened. She approached, measuring the boy's temperature, commenting that his face was very red and seemed to be feverish. Teasing her subordinate, Raven questioned what she would do if he were really sick and secretly wondered if she would also be kind to him under those conditions. But to his surprise, her answer was that she would have to take a break from her duties as a body pillow. Instead, she would discuss and take care of the king. After all, she might not be his pillow, but she could lend a hand. Kind-hearted, Raven took the girl's hand to give her a kiss, explaining that she didn't need to do anything for him, at least nothing beyond staying by his side, which was enough. Their moment is interrupted when Owl enters the room, informing that the human army was advancing toward the castle. Therefore, the king stands up, saying he would take care of it. Before leaving, he makes a point of asking Eiglet to stay in the room, where she would be safe and sound. And the girl agrees, asking her master to be careful out there, even though she hadn't heard the entire conversation of the two guards earlier. Meanwhile, sitting alone in the office, the girl worried about the advance of the human army, especially since even if the saint didn't show up, that scenario could become the stage for a war. She knew it wasn't that simple, but she wanted a way to stop so many conflicts. Deeply, she wished she could make the Peterix kingdom stop attacking demon territory. But to be frank, she was just a little girl who kept running away from problems. Her solitude ends when Puffin enters the room with her usual unfriendly face. She surprises Eiglet, who quickly asks what had happened and informs her that the Demon King had already left the room. However, the girl doesn't respond and just quickly pulls the human's arm, opening a kind of portal in the wall and throwing her without thinking twice. Eiglet falls face first onto the hard floor, crashing into a huge blade and questions, "What the hell is happening?" She was being subdued by some guards with very unpleasant expressions. Noticing the emblem on the armor, she concluded that they were soldiers from the Pitterix kingdom, and in front of them was someone she knew very well. It was her brother, celebrating the fact that he had finally found that fugitive. Eiglet couldn't believe that this was happening. Next to the boy, the lady she had met with Mena earlier asks if that was the girl he was looking for, which Heron confirms. However, he points his sword at the old woman, saying that she had done a great job in calling her a sorceress, but he quickly corrected himself, referring to her as a demoness. It was impossible that the boy had gone so far just to find his sister, but he was surprised that he had noticed. Shouting, the prince of the Pitterix kingdom orders his soldiers to restrain the creature with a magical containment and to imprison Eiglet in the carriage along with her, because, according to him, their mother was waiting for both of them to return. Inside the demon's castle, when he returned to his room, Raven was surprised. He didn't find the girl sitting there, so he called her name after all. He had told her to wait. Eiglet's absence in the room left the boy terrified, especially since he clearly remembered telling her to wait there, just like her response, confirming that she would be waiting and asking him to be careful. The Demon King was already getting stressed because no matter how many times he warned the girl not to disappear, she didn't obey. It was then that he noticed a red stain in the air. As he approached, he concluded that it could be the remnants of a portal that had been opened there. But who opened this portal? After all, Eiglet was still not capable of such an activity. After feeling the magic a little more, he concluded that the only one responsible for this could only be Puffin. Meanwhile, in the human kingdom, Eiglet was thrown into a cell, just like Puffin, who is now assuming her original form. Her brother on the other side of the bars confesses that he didn't think the girl would still be alive, and apparently she continued to be a human being. But the princess was not one for beating around the bush and questions whether Heron intended to kill her. But the boy explains that her punishment would be decided in a trial, which was bothersome for him. However, until that happened, the girl would remain locked up there, and the boy warns her that she should not expect any kind of good treatment like she received before. Only Eiglet contests, asking when she was ever treated well in that tower. Heron replies seriously that his original plan was to kill the princess as soon as he found her, and she should be grateful to her mother. For even after the girl tried to take Mena's life, it was the queen who pleaded for mercy for the protagonist. Still, Heron smiled, explaining that even going to trial, the outcome would be obvious. His words make the girl think that the original events of the game had not simply disappeared. So perhaps that world was trying to return to the path of the original timeline, sacrificing the princess, summoning the saint, and finally defeating the Demon King. With her trapped and vulnerable there, Heron turns his back, stating that fleeing from her destiny had not helped at all, and the girl asserts that she did it for herself. She was stressed. That was frustrating, and she did not understand the reason for her brother's treatment. Still, she knew she was not the same person she was on the day she fled the castle. Then, an idea popped into her head. She could absorb a bit of the magic from the people there and use it to her advantage. However, one thing held her back. The prison was entirely built from stones that contained the magic of the prisoners. In other words, she had no chance of executing her plan. Now that she had little to do, a question arose in Eiglet's mind. Why had the character been locked in a tower with magical containment even without having any magic? It was as if someone already knew that the girl could manipulate the power of a third person. A scream calls out from the girl. It was Puffin in her own cell, grumbling on the floor. Eiglet screams, asking if her friend was okay, and explaining that the place prevented the use of magic. But the demoness tells her to shut up, questioning why the girl was worried about her and revealing that she had betrayed her. Eiglet had no idea what Puffin was talking about. And then, the girl explains that she heard that the prince of the kingdom was looking for a woman with white hair and discovered that he was referring to Eiglet. And apparently, she was more than right. There was no longer any reason to hide this. After all, they were searching for the girl publicly to the point of it reaching the ears of a demoness. So, the protagonist concluded that if her existence no longer had to be a secret, they would surely kill her. Unintentionally, the girl with white hair comments that humans had gone that far just to end her life. Puffin, curious, asks why that was, and if she was a criminal or something like that, to which Eiglet responds dejectedly that that was how they liked to portray her. This further confuses the general's mind. But the protagonist continues with her narrative that she had done nothing wrong. Even so, it was hard to believe. For Puffin, there was no way a prince would search for someone who had done nothing. and even the queen's eyes lit up with hatred when they heard Eiglet's name. This last statement makes the princess realize that her stepmother was indeed behind all of this. Angry at the human cynicism, Puffin screams, asking if she was even listening and telling her to show who she really was. But even if she insisted, there was nothing to show. Puffin did everything to accuse the girl and argues that she did not know what kind of magic she had used to achieve her hair. But that color was clearly artificial. After all, someone without any color in their hair or magical powers must be cursed. It was a good hypothesis. At least that was what Eiglet thought. But all she says is that this was indeed her natural color, and she did not know why. The princess explains that her mother died shortly after giving birth to her. After that, her father and brother abandoned her, locking her in that tower for years. That depressing talk makes Puffin ask what she was talking about, as she was sure this whole story was meant to deceive the demon. This surprises Eiglet, who asks how Puffin knew that information. The girl explains that this had happened before she was born, but all demons knew the story, and that was why they hated humans, except for the Demon King, who did not share that same feeling. But of course, the girl preferred to keep that part to herself. Continuing, she states that her lord did not care if she died. However, the general would never let that happen, even if she had to give her life in exchange. Hearing that was too hard, even for Eiglet, who was used to Raven's cold demeanor. After all, he always acted in an indifferent way. However, lately things had changed. Eiglet stands up and makes it clear to the demoness that she did not want to die. So, she invoked the Demon King and asked him to kidnap her from the castle where they were now. That was quite a revelation for the girl, who repeated the human's words in disbelief. And then, she asked who that girl really was. And then, Eiglet introduced herself as Eiglet Archaeopteryx, the princess of the kingdom of Teryx. Eiglet's true title echoed in Puffin's mind. So, she was a princess. The girl got nervous and told the human to stop lying, saying that she shouldn't be there. After all, she had never heard of a princess with that kind of hair, and her words seemed to hit our girl hard. Eiglet had been used to this kind of thing for a while, so all she said was that she was the princess of that kingdom, repeating her name again for the girl. The story of the princess of the kingdom of Teryx, Eiglet Archaeopteryx, was known in the game. Basically, the girl had been born without any kind of magic, threatening the continuity of the royal lineage, at least until 6 months later, when a prince was born, celebrated throughout the kingdom, while the girl was completely forgotten and treated like a true curse. Eiglet explains that even with all this, her brother had been by her side most of the time. When they were children, the little one always looked for the girl, knocking on her door and calling her name. He used to go after the girl when there was no one else around to play with, and that made Eiglet's days much happier. When the boy discovered her existence, that began to become a routine in the palace. However, when his stepmother discovered his escapades, things changed. The protagonist explains that this did not only happen to him. In reality, anyone who was even slightly kind to her was replaced, and the person responsible for all this was about to enter the prison. Mayna enters with a radiant smile, and she doesn't even bother to hide her face to confront her stepdaughter, who looks back at her, tense. Observing the adult woman in front of her, Puffin remembered the girl she spoke to in order to deliver Eiglet, but she didn't know why she had this persecution syndrome with the princess. Mayna smiles, telling the girl that she'd been looking for her for a while, and asks if she has finally decided to side with the demons, questioning where she had learned to act that way, suggesting that it must have been an inheritance from her mother. The woman provokes, asking what exactly the deceased had taught her. With a challenging expression, Eiglet questions whether her stepmother really wanted her to die. After all, it had been she who set it up for them to think that Eiglet had tried to assassinate the queen. Mayna hides behind her fan as always, laughing at the accusation and confirming it. Despite all the changes, over time, the girl knew that her brother did not go around accusing people without any reason. This was new information for the girl. After all, in the game, the character was supposed to remain a prince. Noticing her stepdaughter lost in thought, the woman tells her not to spend too much time reflecting on this, and makes it clear that she should be more concerned about herself, because the next day, she intended to expose her crimes in front of the entire population of the kingdom, and then she would be executed. This revelation makes the protagonist scream in surprise, but Mayna continues her speech, trying to reassure the girl by saying that her death would not be in vain. In reality, it would help defeat the Demon King. And then, it would be goodbye to Eiglet, since her last day there was approaching. Mayna laughs with a devilish laugh in front of the still captive girl, while Eiglet was losing hope of somehow escaping that place. As night fell, The moon shone in the sky, and Puffin was already in a deep sleep, even in that cold cell. Eiglet, on the other hand, couldn't close her eyes and thought it must be a very difficult situation for her. Earlier, the girl had freaked out from being bored, throwing herself on the floor and all. Now the princess had concluded that there was no way to escape at that moment. But who knows, there might be hope the next day. And that could be an advantage for her to escape with the help of a sword stolen from some soldier. But after that, what would she do? First, she would have to get past Heron, who was strong but not invincible. However, she would like to tell the truth and prove that to her brother. If she died, the saint would indeed be invoked, and then the game would begin. Which means that if she dies, he dies too. But Eiglet couldn't let that happen. Suddenly, a small raven bursts into the girl's cell. Spreading its wings, it says it has found her, surprising the protagonist. For now, the Demon King had materialized in front of her and was saying her name as usual, and Eiglet says his name aloud due to the surprise of finding him there, questioning what had happened, and he pulls the girl by the arm, firmly enveloping her in a tight embrace, which leaves Eiglet even more surprised and awkward. She didn't quite know what to say to him, so she calls him in the hope that Raven would break the silence between them. But all the boy does is squeeze even tighter before shouting in the girl's ear to ask what she expected to happen. His shouting gradually wakes Puffin, and she watches him hug Eiglet with his usual care, while he continues his sermon, complaining that he had already told the princess to stay in her room. Seeing that scene broke Puffin's heart into 1,000 pieces. He was clinging to Eiglet as if he had known her forever, and as if he depended on her. Halfway through the situation, the girl asks if that reaction was just because she was a body pillow that comforted him. But unlike the other times, he remained passive towards the girl. He shouts that it wasn't that, and declares that he wanted the princess by his side because of who she was. This takes the protagonist by surprise, even though it was super obvious at this point in the story. And for the first time, she reveals her feelings, saying that she wanted to be by her master's side and asking for his permission to do so. This is indeed unexpected, and all that affection makes Raven's cheeks turn red. Before he responds that of course she could do that, the girl explains that to be by her master's side, she had to resolve some issues first, but he asks her to leave that in his hands. Raven sighs, tired of the stubborn way the girl had, but allows her to do as she sees fit, on the condition that if things got too serious, he would intervene in the situation. And the girl smiles, grateful to have found such a good companion. The princess thanks him, but before she can finish her sentence, she is taken by surprise by a kiss on her hand. And then he states that he wouldn't leave the girl alone that night, pulling her closer to inform her that it wasn't just because he wanted to use her as a pillow, which finally Eiglet seems to understand. Watching that whole scene was painful for Puffin, who remained motionless as if he weren't even there. The next day, the noble hall received the girl deemed a criminal. They announced the arrival of Princess Eiglet, bound by ropes. Her face bore a deep sadness, giving the impression that she regretted her habits in front of all those people. She places herself in front of the king, her brother, and her stepmother, guilty for all of that, and greets the first two. Before lowering her voice to speak to Mena, the look she directed at the woman who always pulled her ear was indescribable. However, Mena remained indifferent behind her fan, hiding the huge smile for finally getting rid of that girl. Making a scene, the woman pretends to faint, blaming Eiglet's malicious gaze for her discomfort and being attended to by Heron. The woman states for everyone to hear that the girl was trying to kill her with a curse. This leaves the prince shocked, and he urges the priest to hurry up with the ceremony and expose Eiglet's crimes. Thus, the priest begins to read that the princess, unable to accept her own life circumstances, tried to curse the empress so that she would die of resentment, something that had been seen and witnessed by guards and maids. And with the prince's help, they managed to defeat the creature, but ended up letting it escape with Eiglet's help. So her fate was sealed. She was to face the death penalty. However, the priest offers a chance for the girl to save herself by helping the humans defeat the Demon King. Before the priest explains exactly what he means, Eiglet intervenes, questioning if he was saying that she should sacrifice herself to summon a saint from another world. Even without receiving an answer, the girl says that even being accused of a crime she didn't commit, the priest expected her to be killed under the pretext of a sacrifice. Her words put a scowl on Mena's face. While Heron listens to the girl's accusations in shock, the nobles on the side are also shocked, wondering what she meant by false accusations and sacrifice. Realizing that the shot was backfiring, Mena pretends to cry, questioning why she was saying those things and stating that she already knew that the good-hearted girl that Eiglet was no longer existed, and now she was holding hands with the devil. The The princess was already fed up with so much pretense. Quickly, she asked for her husband's permission, Eiglet's father, to do what needed to be done. According to her, the only thing that could save the girl was the flames. However, her wife was definitely not there, and orders her subordinates to bring the flames to the location. When the door opens, both Eiglet and Puffin look at what awaited them with tension, and a huge dragon enters the place. Its presence makes Eiglet remember when they encountered the red dragons, and one of them even mentioned that humans had captured a dragon. And there it was, roaring in front of her, being treated like a true abominable creature. Eiglet is not scared of the creature. On the contrary, she celebrates its presence, asking to use its power for a little while. While all the judgment was happening, the Demon King watched disguised as a body. The humans soon panic at the girl's movements, ordering to create a strong magic barrier, trapping both the girl and the dragon inside. She was already tired of being killed that way. After all, it was always like this in the game. But Eiglet was resigned, as no one really needed to believe her. Face to face with that beast, the princess asserts that she no longer belonged to the monarchy of that nation. Her words leave the king horrified, and the stepmother stares at him, trying to understand what he will do. Thus, the emperor, who should care for his own daughter, gives the orders for his men to contain her, shouting that they should purify the royal blood that had been touched by the demon. This makes the dragon roar, and Puffin throws herself in front of the girl, forming a shield to protect her from the dragon's flame. However, a simple roar is enough to make this magic crack, all because the demoness had used too much of her magic in prison and now she had little power left. It doesn't take long for the shield to explode, throwing both Eiglet and the general against the containment wall. And the impact helps the MC to free herself. She helps Puffin, who is injured and exhausted. Crying, Puffin says that all of this was because the Demon King was desperate to be by the girl's side. Eiglet looks deep into Puffin's eyes, making the girl stop crying. And she stands up, determined to end all of this. The humans outside were shocked by the fact that the demoness had protected the princess. And although they couldn't hear the conversations happening inside the barrier, they concluded that the girl was indeed holding hands with the demons. Meanwhile, Mayna watched the whole situation filled with hatred, as things were not going according to her plan. In reality, the dragon was holding back for some reason. When she tries to observe better, the image she has of her stepdaughter is completely distorted, and the woman widens her eyes. But when she looks again, everything is clear again. Maybe she was just seeing things, but there was no denying it. Observing her stepdaughter, she couldn't help but notice something strange about her. Before, she was a shy girl who couldn't handle anything, but now she exuded coldness and anxiety, which reminded her of someone she knew quite well. Her mother, who came to Mayna's mind in an instant on a day when they were both making flower crowns in the garden. The woman with pink hair gets excited when she realizes they have finished to show her friend. And Mayna says that she was indeed very talented. That memory leaves the villain dazed. Of course, Eiglet was Ibis's daughter, but that still wouldn't change the fact that she had no power. In her mind, she hoped the girl would die soon when the dragon finally unleashed its flames into the air. But neither Eiglet nor Puffin were hit, as the white-haired girl used her powers to reflect the magic, catching her stepmother by surprise. The girl condensed the dragon's flames with enviable ease, closing her hands as if she were holding something. She still didn't have full control over the technique that Owl taught her, so she ended up sucking all the magic instead of holding it. But that was okay. The dragon in front of her claims that he would kill her with his next blow, just as she wanted, and Eiglet tells him to give it his all. The red dragon's eyes light up at her request. Then he unleashes all his flames in the direction of the girl, who quickly absorbs the power into a large magic circle, manipulating that ball of light with her delicate hands, and concentrating to hold it and not absorb everything at once. This time the girl manages to let a small magic ball form, and smiling, she warns that it was time to return that to the dragon. With her movement, the containment walls crack, emitting an immense light in the face of the monarchy, and leaving her stepmother completely floored. That seemed impossible, but there was Eiglet on top of a pile of ashes. The girl picks up the dragon egg that emerged from this battle, promising the creature that she would make sure to take it home as soon as possible. The Demon King, who was still disguised, flaps his wings, approaching to land on Eiglet's shoulder. Meanwhile, the nobles there observed the scene, shouting that the princess was now hand in hand with the demon and warning everyone to be careful. But the girl was calm and questions what the woman in front of her intended to do next. Just staring at the completely lost and scared look of her stepmother, Eiglet now shows that she is no longer to be used as a doormat by them. Mayna is so shocked that she ends up dropping her fan. That's because seeing that girl in front of her reminded her of her mother 37 years earlier. Meina and Ibis were born into noble families, very close to the crown. However, their families never got along very well. In fact, their own parents brought the two together with the intention of making them compete against each other for being the same age. On one of those days, Meina was finishing her studies, thinking about a magical formula that needed to be reversible, when she was interrupted by Ibis, who burst into the bookstore, shouting. With little patience, the girl asks if she didn't know how to knock on the door, scolding little Ibis, who at that time was only 6 years old. Still, Meina maintains a serious tone, asking what she would do if she had entered while using magic and saying that it was very dangerous to distract a sorceress. The pink-haired girl apologizes but justifies herself, saying that she hadn't sensed any magic emanating from the room. Her remarks left Meina stressed. After all, Ibis's magical ability was limited, but her instincts about this kind of thing were always right. A few years later, when the two entered the boarding school, they ended up sharing the same room. And despite their parents wanting to see them compete, they ended up becoming great friends. Meina asks why the girl was in such a hurry, to which Ibis replies that she had something to show. And then she pulls the little sorceress, because even though Ibis was a simple girl, she was also excited and very cute. When Meina turned 15, she was appointed as the queen's companion and escort. She was in a brief meeting, and the man sitting in front of her explained that the royal family had shown interest in the girl personally. They had heard about her school evaluations and also her ability to use magic. Because of this, she was a perfect candidate to become queen. Just that possibility made the girl shiver. After all, the queen was the most prestigious woman in that nation. Then, the school director hands her several study materials, informing her that her curriculum would now include studies oriented towards the queen, warning that she would have to complete them before graduating. Seeing her new assignments, she concludes that now she would only have time to eat and sleep and questions whether the lessons on spells and enchantments would continue normally, to which the gentleman confirms with the justification that she could not risk losing this chance for the daughter of that family. And then, the girl agrees. Her father always acted that way. It wasn't as if Meina had already lost in terms of her grades or magical powers, but still, he acted as if the girl wasn't enough, which made her wonder what exactly she was losing in comparison to Ibis. She was distracted in thought when she heard her name being called. It was Ibis asking why she seemed so spaced out, wanting to know what was going on in her mind. But Meina says she was just being thoughtful, unlike her friend, who never seemed to worry about anything. Her comment makes Ibis laugh and explain that her father and other close people always told her to try harder, but she knew she couldn't increase her ability to use magic. So there wasn't much point in stressing over it. Hearing the girl talk about herself like that motivated Meina even more because she thought she couldn't lose to someone like her. Over time, rumors about Meina becoming the next queen began to surface at school. Of course, it was no surprise. However, they had never heard of a queen with as much magical power as the girl. There were even people who thought it would be better to make her the sorceress of the royal family. In fact, there would surely be someone better to serve as queen. And that someone was Ibis, who was animatedly chatting with a boy. As soon as she notices her friend's presence, she calls her excitedly, and Meina greets the prince politely, who feels awkward because he hadn't gone to their school to meet his future bride, but rather to talk to Ibis friendly. The girl explains that they were discussing a new magic formula, and Meina asks if her friend had developed another spell. Despite knowing that she was basically useless, but this time the young lady was more than excited. According to her, with this enchantment, even people with low levels of magic could use powerful spells, and this takes Meina by surprise. A good example is that someone like her could use spells just like Meina, and thus, those who had problems due to low magic could cast strong spells. The idea was that this would also contribute to the field of medicine in the future, claiming that she would make a great queen, and this sentence makes Meina freeze. When she arrives home later, Meina is greeted with a slap directly from her father, who is yelling at the girl for letting the place of queen be stolen from her and how useless she was. In the end, the king chose Ibis as the queen of the sacred kingdom of Piterix, leaving Meina as a mere concubine. Every day she wondered why the king chose her. After all, now her life made no more sense. She had spent years fighting for something in vain, while Ibis had done nothing to deserve it. She was better than the girl in many aspects. Furious, she thought that Ibis should be dead, and yet she still managed to get in her way. Then Meina pulls out Heron's sword, which makes him scream, asking what their mother was doing, charging at Eiglet. However, the Demon King spreads his wings, commanding her not to move, deflecting that terrible sword and knocking the stepmother to the ground. The wings covered Eiglet like a shield, frightening everyone around. He then takes his original form and says that this human was truly despicable. How dare she try to touch Eiglet? Everyone noticed those huge horns and the intense magical power flowing from Raven's body. The woman watches in astonishment, asking why he was there, while the Demon King embraced Eiglet as if she were a cherished jewel. The girl scolds him for revealing his true identity, and he apologizes but explains that he couldn't just stand there, watching everything happen without doing anything. The nobles present in the hall soon create a commotion, saying that a demon had appeared and that he was actually their king. Heron moves towards his mother, ready to defend her. Pulling the sword that the demon lord had plunged into the ground and determined to reach him, he states that he wouldn't let Raven do whatever he wanted there. The Demon King watches the two attentively when he noticed something very familiar in Mena. A flashback of the younger girl comes to his mind, revealing that she was a human who had made a pact with the demon years ago. Then he says that he finally remembered addressing Mena to confirm that she was indeed the girl he had encountered many years ago. However, the woman pretends not to understand, asking what he was talking about. Therefore, Raven states that she was the concubine who tried to make a contract with the demon to curse the queen of that nation, calling her a fallen dark sorceress. Hearing all of this, Eiglet is confused. She had no idea what Raven was talking about. After all, she had no knowledge of any curse regarding her mother. The image of the pink-haired woman comes to her mind, and the argument between the demon and Mena continues with Raven being sincere in saying that he never expected to see her sitting on the queen's throne one day. Mena is at a loss for what to invent, seeing that the king heard all of that. So she asks him not to listen to that demon accusing both him and Eiglet of conspiring against her. After all, her magical power represented a threat to both. However, the woman is reprimanded because Raven tells her to stop denying and admit that she had used all her power in the curse. Even though the color of her hair hadn't changed, she probably couldn't even use magic anymore. This mention brings memories to Mena many years before, when she was still a concubine. She was carrying the king's child in her belly, even before Ibis. Watching the interactions between the two, she wondered why her former friend couldn't bear a child. But everything made sense at that moment, especially since Mena was superior and would not accept losing to Ibis. What was happening was merely a mistake of the king, and she would approve of that. So, she worked on a powerful enchantment. Thus, the child she carried would be born without any kind of magic, and Ibis would die, for that baby would drain all her power. Furthermore, when that child was born, she would not live for long. Eventually, Ibis managed to get pregnant, but because of the curse, she died as soon as the child left her body. However, there was a small flaw in the spell, because Eiglet remained alive. In reality, she grew, becoming more beautiful with each passing year and absorbing the magic from the people around her. Heron was shocked by that revelation. It didn't take long for the priest to reveal the truth, shouting for mercy and explaining that he had forged this prophecy due to the queen's orders, using the excuse of a sacrifice. Desperate, Mena screams that Eiglet was a cursed child, a child who only survived by absorbing the life of her own mother, which made her a murderer. You could see the conflict in Heron's eyes, who was no longer so sure about his mother's sincerity. Still, the queen shouted, commanding him to defeat the Demon King and his own sister, who, according to her, had fallen into darkness. Raven, on the other hand, remained calm and began to explain the effects of the curse. Eiglet finally spoke up, asking if she really had killed her mother, but Raven hugged her even tighter, explaining that if she could absorb magic randomly, the entire nation would have perished long ago. So there was no need to worry. For even when she was a child, the princess did not harm anyone. Mena remained cold with her act and said that all this talk was madness, until the king spoke up, shouting Ibis's name. Sadly, he said that his ex-wife was already sick. Moreover, when alive, Eiglet's mother knew that giving birth would be her end, but she did not want Mena to have to bear that burden alone. She wanted to protect her, as they had always been together. With the birth of her daughter, Ibis wanted Eiglet to help Heron, the future king, so that the two could protect that kingdom together. The story seemed too moving for Mena, who asked what he was talking about, because if it were really true, it had gone down a terrible path, all out of jealousy. The realization of her actions finally fell on the shoulders of the protagonist's stepmother. Mena hated Ibis. She hated the fact that she was innocent and loved by everyone, but also that she was strong, unshakable even by her parents. And she always remained sincere, without many ambitions for power. Deep down, she wished the girl would stay that way forever. Eiglet had never seen her stepmother in that position, thrown on the ground, consumed by regrets. It was then that she realized her hair was becoming lighter, as if life was being drained from the woman. Eiglet asked what was happening, and Raven explained that she had made a pact with the demon and used all her magic to cast the curse on Eiglet's mother. And despite having tried to hide it all this time with the remainder of her power, it seemed she had reached her limit. Heron tried to approach his mother, but he hesitated. And having to act correctly as the heir prince, he ordered the traitor who tried to cast a curse on the royal family to be arrested. Thus, Mena was quickly taken away from there. After that, the king shouted for his daughter. Throwing himself at Eiglet's feet, he apologized for having been deceived by that cruel woman. He broke down in tears, explaining that he never imagined Mena would be that kind of person. And his judgment of others' character was better when he was still with his own family. The monarch blamed Mena for everything, including Ibis's death. Noticing her silence, the king called for his daughter. But she didn't even know if she could consider him her father. After all, King Pitterix had never treated her that way. Before she could respond, Heron stated that it was useless. After all, the girl they were facing had been consumed by the Demon King and had fallen into darkness because of him. He concluded this because the previous battle with the dragon had likely been influenced by Raven. After all, his sister had been raised and protected in a tower with a locked-up princess. Deep down, Heron felt pity for her, because he knew that her life had only been that hell because of her mother. He shouted, asking Eiglet to hear his voice and remember the kind person she once was. The prince drew his sword, commanding the Demon King to free his sister. This request left the guy curious, and he was already preparing to use his magic. But he was reprimanded by Eiglet, who caught his attention. The girl positioned herself in front of her brother, repeating her words about how she fell into darkness. The girl moves the sword away, asking if Heron remembered the day he made a flower crown for her and how he praised her hair, saying it was beautiful, which made her very happy. The memory makes the boy smile, affirming that he remembered everything. However, Eiglet becomes serious as she says that despite this, he never believed her, even though she was the only support she had while she was trapped in that tower her whole life. So, if she had fallen into darkness, it was not the fault of the Demon King or even Mena, but rather her brother and also her father, who neglected her even knowing she was not to blame. Remorse hits him and he drops the sword to the ground, kneeling in front of Eiglet, feeling ashamed of his past actions. Eiglet knew her brother well enough to know he was stubborn, but she also knew he had a limit, and if she could touch his heart, everything would be fine. Still, she couldn't help but wonder if she really hadn't fallen into darkness. Because after so much suffering, she had found Raven, and now she was with him. Speaking of the Demon King, the boy asks if all that confusion was over and calls the girl to go home. This makes Eiglet smile, saying it was time to go. She gently holds her savior's hand. The prince calls out for Eiglet before she leaves, pleading for her to wait. But the girl was tired of waiting and even more tired of that family. So she is taken by the Demon King just like on the day she escaped. And her brother remains in shock, calling for her. The boy warns that when they return, she should be prepared, since she left without permission. Happy to be back in Raven's arms, she simply smiles in agreement. As they flew, Eiglet thought about everything that had happened up to that point. First, that after her accident, when she woke up, she had transformed into the character from the game. Then, she asked the Demon King to hire her, becoming his body pillow. The girl got used to living in Raven's castle. And then she was captured. So, finally, she had to face her fate. And now, there she was, in the arms of the boy who always saved her. Noticing their looks, the Lord asks what was wrong. However, Eiglet smiled, explaining that it was nothing. Somehow, she felt close to the boy, and she knew that from then on, that would be her life. As soon as they returned, they were greeted by Owl, who bows to his master, happy that he is safe and sound, at least until he notices Eiglet's presence there. The girl thanks for the reception, but she arrives giving a task to the butler, asking if she could leave the children she was carrying in his care. The boy approaches to take a good look at the little ones, surprised to find a red dragon egg and Puffin in a completely unusual form. But Eiglet explains that the girl had used a lot of magic to protect her. Since they were in prison, she had her powers drained. But even so, she made sure to protect the girl. And Eiglet explains that, according to Raven, the form the girl took was a kind of defense from demons, as if it were a way to temporarily conserve energy. It was shocking for the butler to imagine that Puffin had protected that human. The protagonist, worried, asks if they would really return to normal. To which the butler explains that yes, but it would probably take some time. In any case, she is happy. being interrupted by Raven, who insists that he had already warned her, and that she should have trusted him. The girl even has to explain that it wasn't that she didn't trust him, but she needed confirmation from outside. Meanwhile, Owl watches them, still shocked by the fact that Puffin had succumbed to the charms of the human, just like his master. The butler calls the attention of the two to inform them that the girl's medicinal bath was ready, and he had also prepared a snack for the girl. Raven suggests they start with the bath, but Eiglet's stomach growls loudly, and she feels embarrassed, saying it was just because she had been locked up for a long time without eating anything. Then, Owl suggests they go for the snack. The interaction between the two makes the Demon King laugh like never before, finding the protagonist's reaction cute, leaving Eiglet embarrassed. And the girl tells him to stop laughing at her. The subordinate had never seen his master laugh so genuinely, and he hurried to finish preparing the meal. Already in the bathing room, Eiglet is embarrassed, staring at Raven. He turns to face the protagonist and asks what was wrong this time, leaning closer to her face and commenting that he was quite red. The girl even tries to respond, but she only thought that when her master warned her to prepare, she didn't know he was referring to this kind of activity. Raven calls her name, asking if now he could say who he really was after everything they went through together. This catches our girl off guard, at the same time not knowing exactly how she would respond to that. Realizing that the sentence came out somewhat aggressive, the boy explains that it wasn't quite like that. It's just that he never imagined he would feel that way, revealing that at first he thought she was an interesting person, that he could kill her if she posed any danger in the future, but she always exceeded expectations. Moreover, she managed to free him from that terrible pain. Before he could realize it, he was completely fallen for her, watching her constantly while she laughed happily. Besides, he hated seeing her being kind to other people, and the fact that the girl didn't smile just for him, which showed how jealous he was in my opinion. He also hated seeing how indifferent she was regarding her own life. Eiglet listened attentively as the boy completed the sentence, saying that even so, it was he who couldn't bear the thought of losing her one day. Hearing the confession, the protagonist hugs him tightly, and finally confesses that she loved Raven. His words make him burn with passion. Lifting her face to look into her eyes, Raven confesses that he felt the same and loved her, and sealing this silent agreement with a passionate kiss. Unlike the other times they kissed, this time there was something more, because there was love. He gently lays Eiglet on the bed, and finally tells her that she belonged to him. Hearing those declarations coming from the Demon King's mouth was like a dream for Eiglet, and their kiss seems to last an eternity. When they separate their mouths, Eiglet is completely dazed, calling for her master breathlessly, and he does the same, quickly attacking her neck. The Demon King puts her back on the bed, and Eiglet begins to realize where she ended up, especially when Raven starts to take off his shirt. Eiglet observed every detail of his body, which, by the way, was very handsome. She was nervous because she had been touched before, but never held like this. Thus, she realizes that they will finally seal their love, which, obviously, the author left to our imagination. The next day, Puffin enters her master's office full of bravado, asking why he had chosen Eiglet after all, but is reprimanded by Owl, who asks if she was bothering them again. But the girl says she didn't do that kind of thing. With the changes in the story's development, Eiglet was saved. At least that's what they thought would happen. Heron bows in front of her, asking her to guide him with her strength, as she was the only one capable of defeating the Demon King. In front of him stood the Saint, destined to thwart Raven's plans, who had been summoned. Flashes of when Eiglet was saved by Raven, claiming that if she had truly fallen into the arms of darkness, it would have been because of her brother, come to light. And the boy screams, asking her to wait. Luckily, that had only been a dream. Heron stands up, still trying to recover from those memories. Since that day, he couldn't get his younger sister out of his head, calling for her in his thoughts as if it would help, and he blamed himself for that. After all, he had failed to notice his mother's mistakes, and therefore did not protect his sister properly. He was sure that the girl was being punished day and night by that abominable creature in the prince's eyes. However, he hoped that Eiglet could endure a little longer, as he would not give up on saving her. The problem was that to do that, he first had to defeat the Demon King. His daydreams are interrupted by some knocks on the door, and a girl with dark hair enters the room. It was Hibari, the saint, summoned by the boy. Worried because she heard his screams and imagined he was having a nightmare, Heron apologizes for having disturbed her, feeling awkward with her presence there. To him, that woman was the last hope he had to rescue Eiglet from the Demon King's arms. Of course, that wasn't a great guarantee, and didn't mean that Heron could fully trust her. Hibari approaches him, holding the prince's hands to say that he didn't need to worry about that, and that for her, the most important thing was to know if he was okay. She was worried about him because she heard the story of his sister being kidnapped by the Demon King, and she tries to comfort him, affirming that it was normal for him to feel somewhat distressed. Those words comfort him, and he speaks of the saint with great respect, but she asks him to just call her by her name, Hibari, a name that seemed strange to the boy, although at the same time it sounded familiar. Changing the subject, the girl says she might not know exactly how that world worked, but she had plenty of knowledge about what it was like to be swallowed by darkness because of the Demon King. Her words make the boy's eyes shine, and she concludes her reasoning by saying that the two of them would bring light back to that world together, willing to defeat the Demon King, even if it could cost her own life. The promise makes Heron feel more at ease, and he smiles, telling Hibari that he was counting on her. With her help, the prince was sure he could defeat the Demon King, and he hoped that his sister would wait for him, as he would save her at any cost. Meanwhile, in the Demon King's castle, the floor was being cleaned, this time by Eiglet, who looked exhausted. But upon finishing her cleaning, she realized that the place was already so tidy that cleaning more or less made no difference at all. After everything that happened, she decided to go back to doing tasks in the castle as before. Besides, of course, continuing to serve as the boy's body pillow. Her face burns with shame as she remembers what happened last night, but she doesn't even have time to think about it, as she is surprised by the presence of the Demon King. Now, being a pillow was not her only function, as Eiglet had become solely his. The boy teases her, telling her to be less flamboyant. However, Raven argues that he didn't hide his presence and asks if she was dissociating again. The boy approaches, making the girl's face turn even redder, and then reveals that he was a little jealous. A big change in their relationship. Eiglet even tries to disguise it, saying she was thinking that the place was already very clean, so scrubbing the floor was going nowhere. Ever since she became his girlfriend, things between them had been a bit more intense. And now that she stopped to think, Eiglet realized that the signs of the guy's interest had always been there. Returning to the conversation, the Demon King gets even closer, asking if the girl was lying to him. When he tries to stick to the princess's body, she becomes euphoric, asking him not to come any closer. After all, her hands were quite dirty. But he didn't care, leaving the girl weak-kneed while he held her. As usual, Raven calls out Eiglet's name, which she pushes away without thinking. She couldn't stand another second and wondered what he was thinking doing something like that in the middle of the day. The girl steps back, using the excuse that she hadn't even finished cleaning yet. The boy searches for a very important object in his pocket, a little box with a ring, the item he really wanted to give to Eiglet. And he didn't understand why he got so nervous when approaching this moment of giving it. Oh, how cute these two are. I can't take it. It had been a while since Eiglet and Raven became a couple, which made her comfortable. After all, he showed his love every day, saying things like, "Don't show that sweet face because it increases my desire to devour you," or asking her to come closer and saying that he loved her and that she belonged to him. Just remembering this made the protagonist blush, and she deeply hoped that the Demon King wouldn't act this way in front of other people. From time to time, she even needed to avoid it because she felt embarrassed to act that way. Maybe that was exactly why he got so anxious and kept leaving marks on her body. However, the protagonist had no doubts that she loved him. It's just that dating a lord could be a bit much sometimes. And when she blushed, the boy still called her cutie. That day, she chose an outfit that covered her entire body on purpose. She was full of marks because of her boyfriend, and it made her wonder if he liked making her blush that much. Puffin entered the girl's room without warning, making the protagonist scream in surprise. Then she asked if Eiglet still hadn't gotten dressed. With her usual patience, the demoness told her to hurry up and follow her. The two of them walked down the hallway, and the protagonist questioned what was happening and why she was in such a hurry. To which the general replied that she had heard a rumor about a strange woman who had arrived in that city. This conversation was very strange, but Puffin explained that apparently people were calling her a saint and had said that she had enough power to defeat the Demon King. Puffin wouldn't shut up, saying it could just be a bluff. But Raven and his confidants were discussing it and asked for Eiglet's opinion. That was inconceivable for the protagonist. As if she hadn't been sacrificed? How was the saint summoned to that world? It was true that the summoning ritual could happen even with Eiglet alive, but following the game's reasoning, her death would be a prerequisite to summon the saint. It was then that the girl remembered something very important. Since Eiglet had exposed her stepmother's crimes, they probably realized that they didn't need to kill anyone to perform the ritual. Noticing that the girl had stopped walking, Puffin questions why she was standing there like a statue. But the girl plays it off, saying it was nothing and urging them to continue. They finally arrive at the Demon King's office, and Puffin announces the entrance of the two. Eiglet apologizes, explaining that Puffin had already mentioned the appearance of the saint in the kingdom of Piterix. And Raven explains that they had confirmed the information that the ritual was performed by the prince, Eiglet's brother. And since he remembered that his girlfriend had mentioned the existence of this saint, he wanted to know what she knew about her. Sensing the tension in the air and the protagonist's distant expression, the young man calls her attention, making her respond that she knew of the saint's existence, explaining that she must be summoned from another world and had hair and eyes as dark as ravens. Moreover, she was the only creature capable of defeating him. This last part causes a stir among the Demon King's subordinates. However, Eiglet was not willing to let that happen, so she asked them to let her handle it, as she wouldn't allow anyone to hurt him. Puffin is the first to speak up in protest, but she is interrupted by Raven, who questions the protagonist if she knew more information about the saint, which the girl denies. He was already ready to deny her request. When Eiglet explained that, although she didn't know about the saint, she had information about the figure known as such. And in fact, she knew her very well. Raven describes her characteristics, talking about her hair and dark eyes, besides the rumor that she was capable of defeating the Demon King. This awakens a vivid memory in Eiglet. After all, in the game, he was always defeated by the woman. That's why she insists on being allowed to deal with it. After all, the saint was a real danger to the young man. However, he had a condition. If she wanted to do this alone, she had to lay out her plan in detail. Thus, the protagonist reveals that she would send the woman back to her world. This surprises Owl, who contests this possibility. After all, the summoning magic of the saint was already unknown, so it would be even harder to send her back to wherever she came from. But Eiglet was confident in explaining that the woman would have to find someone to go with her to defeat the Demon King. And if that didn't happen, she wouldn't be able to do anything and would have to return to her world. In the game, there were two terrible endings. In the first, if the player's level wasn't high enough but they still tried to challenge the Demon King, the saint and her partner would be devoured by Raven. After that, the Demon King would absorb the girl's power, losing control and destroying the world. While reflecting, Eiglet was certain that this was an ending that couldn't happen, as she wouldn't let her beloved go through that. The other alternative would be for the saint to form an alliance with another character from the academy, and before she could face the Demon King, she would wake up in her bed in the real world, which would make her think that it had all been just a dream. And when that happened, her status wouldn't be saved in a new game. Basically, it was as if the saint had never existed. And this was the original form of the game, and it was for this reason that Eiglet wanted to make sure that her group would achieve this second ending. However, if Hibari disappeared alone, the prince would lose his hopes in the existence of the divine figure. This second ending only happened when the saint was caught trying to form relationships with all the male characters at once, because they would find out and put an end to everything. It was a terrible scenario for the players. That was exactly why Eiglet had to give her all to ensure that this would be the ending, especially since the girl didn't know if the saint was a reincarnation or just any character from the game. But if that continued, then the main character would have already managed to escape her fatal death. Trying to convince her master, the girl reveals that to understand that world, the saint would enter the academy, where she would later meet a potential partner who had great sword skills. Puffin can't help but comment on the fact that Eiglet has extensive knowledge about so many things, but she manages to disguise it with the excuse that she was a princess after all, even if she only knew so much because of the game. Recapping her reasoning, Owl questions the plan of the white-haired girl. It was to prevent the saint from finding a partner, something that Eiglet confirms. Although the game only encourages this reality, she couldn't explain much to them, or they would become even more suspicious. She was afraid to share everything she knew, especially since before arriving in that world, she was in a very different place. The protagonist closes her eyes, gathering courage to speak, and then she asks again for the Demon King to let her handle this matter. The young man thinks before firmly denying her request. This leaves the girl stunned, and she questions why he was making that decision. But the guy justifies that the nobility of the kingdom of Piterix now knew the image of the princess. They knew what her beautiful face looked like, and especially her white hair. Therefore, he couldn't let the girl loose in a place full of noble offspring. After all, that would be very dangerous. And the young man asserts this with an unprecedented seriousness. Trying to convince him in any way, Eiglet argues that if the problem was her hair, she could just dye it. But the young man denies. He remembers that the girl lived absorbing other people's magical powers, and therefore, maintaining the hair color would be difficult for her. Moreover, it wasn't something Raven was willing to let her do, especially since, despite not seeming like it, she belonged to him. Hearing those words usually made the girl feel awkward, and she calls out her beloved's name. However, before she could say anything, the butler asks for permission and suggests that perhaps he could change the girl's hair color using magic, something that the Demon King seems to agree with more. However, he explains that it didn't seem possible to do that, but the servant insists, making it clear that even he knew how much concern Eiglet had for her master, because deep down, he didn't even feel that way. His words touch Eiglet for the first time. After all, since she arrived at the castle, the young man had only shown his disdain for the human. And then, he concludes his speech by saying that perhaps he could solve the problem. In the game, there was a rare item formed by the fusion of two opposing magical stones, called the Renry magic stone. When this item was separated and used by two people, it allowed them to feel each other's heartbeats and magic. The butler had brought the box with this object, explaining that it had been used before by the former Demon King and the respective queen, that is, Raven's mother and father. The young man continued the explanation, stating that the secret stone of Renry was formed by these two magics that neutralized each other and formed one. Although the stone itself had no enchantment, it acted as a conductor to transfer powers between the users of the stone, which meant that even if Eiglet had no magic of her own, she could continuously receive the Demon King's magic. And the two could think of this as a message that they would always be side by side. This sounds romantic to the princess, who looks at her beloved with affection. Meanwhile, Raven reflects, recapping that if the two shared this jewel, he would be responsible for bringing magic to the girl. However, Eiglet worries, asking Owl if people wouldn't confuse her with the demon because of this. But the butler explains that, in practice, there was no difference between human magic and demonic magic. Normally, people only judged by the appearance of demons who had pointed ears and large horns. Of course, her master was powerful, but only a part of that power could be channeled through the stone, so it wouldn't raise any suspicion among humans. That was a great possibility. And the Lord questions if using it would make it possible for Eiglet to use magic like a normal person, which is confirmed by Owl with the caveat that it wouldn't be very strong. This excites the girl. After all, she had never used magic before, and she asks if she could manipulate it. Her boyfriend explains that as long as she had a continuous supply, there was no reason she couldn't succeed. Still, the girl seemed insecure, justifying that she had only reflected magic before, so she wasn't sure if she could invoke any spell or something like that. However, it made sense that she could perform spells sustained only by magic. Raven looked at her completely seriously. He knew that the girl still hid some secrets from him, but he had no doubts about the feelings the protagonist felt, which were very real. Then he calls her, asking her to come closer, and dismisses the other demons so they could be alone for a while, making Puffin and Owl leave the office. As soon as they were alone, Raven approached, confirming with Eiglet that she really wanted to do what she was asking. Upon hearing her yes, the young man asks if all of this was because she wanted to protect him. Then, the girl explains that she knew her lord was very strong, so it might just be arrogant to say she wanted to protect him. But when it came to that wholly, before she can finish her reasoning, the girl is interrupted by Raven's approach. He quickly explains that he didn't think it was a matter of pride, as he could see the concern in the girl's eyes. He knew she was very anxious about him, so he thought she would understand why the Demon King didn't want to let her go. And the girl confirms. She indeed understood that it was a mutual concern. After all, they both loved each other too much. But precisely because of that, she says that the boy also understood her side. He wanted to protect her because he didn't want Raven to die and lose him. That declaration touches him to a certain extent, and the Lord explains that he knew that feeling so well that it even hurt in his chest, as everything she had said so far represented how he felt about her. The Lord stares at the box with the precious stones, remembering that his parents had used those items before. And then he takes the necklace with the magical gem, handing it to Eiglet for her to put on, which the girl gladly accepts, placing that symbol of their bond that would change everything, just like the boy who wears the ring over his grapes. As soon as he finishes putting it on, a bright light envelops him. And the same happens with the protagonist's necklace, which pulses in a vivid pink. The Demon King asks her to try using her magic and makes it clear that he would channel more power if necessary. Then the girl asks him to wait. She closes her eyes to concentrate better and tries to focus on using that magic to change her hair color, transforming her white strands into a shade of pink. The Demon King quickly approaches, touching that hair, before sincerely telling her that he really didn't want to let her go. Sometime later at the academy, comments about the new student were circulating through the halls, including how she was a saint. This surprises one of the classmates, and his friend adds that there was a rumor that the queen had been possessed by a demon or something like that. So now the saint was the kingdom's only hope. Moreover, the rumors about the princess being kidnapped by the Demon King had already spread among the people, and most felt pity for Prince Heron. The conversation is interrupted when one of the guys tells his friend to look at something that caught his attention. It was Eiglet, who was already integrated into the school, and the boys wonder which noble family she was from. The academy the girl had attended was the Sacred Kingdom of Pitteric's Academy for Magical Knights. Although the old name included only the knights, the school had become a sort of boarding school for the children of nobles, offering courses in magic and knighthood, in addition to other regular students. Over the years, attending that school had become a status symbol for the nobility. As she passed by the students, Eiglet thought it was easy to get anything, as long as you had enough money. She had used her mother's name, Ibis, as a disguise, claiming to be the daughter of a regional merchant. With that identity and a generous donation to the academy, after taking a very simple test, she managed to get in. Her plan was simple. She would stay out of sight of important people while triggering events that contributed to her ultimate goal. She watched every movement of the saint attentively. At this point, Hibari was already well spoken of at the school. In the game, it was possible to change your original name. However, players usually kept their name, as there was an event in the game where Prince Heron's affection increased just because the saint was named that way. While disguised there, the protagonist couldn't help but wonder if the girl was an NPC or a reincarnation trying to set a trap for Eiglet's brother. However, to do that, she would need to be in the same classes as the saint. The director announces that they would begin the division of courses, explaining that he knew the newcomers must be hoping to get into classes on chivalry or magic, but that would depend on a simple object, a crystal ball that could measure their magical power. Those with high magic would go to the magic courses. Those who did not meet this requirement but had decent powers would enter the chivalry course. Those who did not stand out would follow the school normally. However, the saint was an exception. In the game, it was predetermined that she would go to the general course, as she was a reincarnated character. The director asks those who were called to step forward. It was then that he assigned the magic course to one of them, making the girl's eyes widen. It was Shrike, the Duke's son and a first-year student. In the game, he was a rival character to Heron. Normally, the boy was quiet and did not show many emotions, but that changed as the player got closer to him. There were 4 more capture targets at the school, but they were all in higher classes. So Eiglet thought they probably weren't around that day. They were the second-year magic student, Quail, the third-year cavalry student, Glaus, and the general third-year student, Robin. Besides them, there was also Prince Heron himself, who was in the second year of the cavalry course. He was the one the protagonist should worry about. After all, if her brother found her, her plan would fall apart. Speaking of her, it was Hibari's turn to approach the crystal ball, making it shine. This impressed the director, who commented that he had never seen so much power condensed in one person to the point that it seemed the crystal ball would break. While the classmates commented on the girl's feat, Sanders stared with indifference. Eiglet looked at the situation with little surprise, as that was how things unfolded in the game anyway. She only came out of that trance when she was called to the front. Hibari returned to her place, still hearing rumors about herself, including one about how Prince Heron was taking care of her. However, something unexpected completely captured her attention. Eiglet, who was behind the crystal ball, had just broken the object. Even Sander, who had no reaction, was left with his mouth agape. Meanwhile, on stage, the protagonist was desperate. That was a terrible sign. And she felt that Jewel was very fragile. Since she wasn't used to it, it was hard to control the magic. So she tried to disguise it, suggesting to the director that the object might have had a crack before, because of the saint and her enormous power. Something the guy agreed with, asking the student to wait a moment. But deep down, she questioned whether the real problem was not her beloved's excessive power. Maybe he had become worried because her heart rate increased due to nervousness. And then, her power transmuted. In his office, the boy kissed the ring as if he could kiss Eiglet through it. Just the memory of the Demon King made her smile. And in her thoughts, she promised that she would protect him no matter what. Sitting in the audience, the students commented on Eiglet's beauty, while others wondered if the crystal had really cracked because of the saint's actions. After all, the protagonist's hair was too light to have so much magic. Hibari watched the murmuring with a sour expression, just like Sander, who returned to acting indifferent. bringing another ball to replace the old one. The director apologized again and told the girl to try. Again. Taking a deep breath, Eiglet approached, apprehensive about what could happen. After this kind of ritual, she managed to stay in the normal course. Now all that was left was to find her new roommate. However, her path was blocked by someone who knew her very well. It was her brother, repeating her real name to make sure of what he was seeing, and questioning whether that pink-haired girl was really the princess. And that's it, everyone. I hope you enjoyed the story. What do you think will happen in this new arc? Will Eiglet get involved with the other protagonists of the game? Or will she stay loyal to the Demon King? Personally, I really like the two of them together. They're adorable, even if he spends most of the time teasing her. Don't forget to leave a comment and subscribe to the channel. This novel is called Devil's Cushion, and I've covered it up to chapter 35. I know you've been asking a lot for part 2 of other videos, and what I can tell you is that more continuations are already on the way. So I hope you'll enjoy them. Kisses, and see you next time.